The big talking point, is Vladimir Putin a war criminal? As the Americans have now described him, as the fighting has intensified and is reaching crisis point. That's going to be our top focus. Plus, I'll have two very special guests because with me, our intrepid Gaurav Sawant, been 25 days, almost a month. A month in Ukraine, and Geeta Mohan, who's been there a fortnight. They are back looking tired, but delighted to have you safe and sound here in the studio. We'll hear from them what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. But first, the 9 headlines at 9. Non-stop shelling in Ukraine continues. Theatre serving as a shelter is bombarded in Kharkiv. Capital Kiev witnesses a barrage of rocket strikes. Reports suggest more than 20 civilians have been killed. UN court orders Russia to stop the war. Zelensky calls the ICJ order a big win. But Russia and Ukraine now zero in on a 15-point peace plan. US sending Switchblade suicide drones to Ukraine to counter Russian kamikaze drones which are slipping past Ukraine air defenses. Radical PFI group declares hijab fight 2.0 in Karnataka, observes complete shutdown in several districts. Udupi College Vice Principal, BJP leader calls hijab petitioners terrorists. Congress G23 leaders meet again, second meeting in 24 hours after Rahul Gandhi reaches out to the rebel camp. Aam Aadmi Party spins a googly, picks cricketer Harbhajan Singh for their Rajya Sabha nomination. Party set to get 5 MPs by the end of March from Punjab alone. Yogi Adityanath returns to his Karma Bhumi of Gorakhpur after winning his first assembly election. Will celebrate Holi in his constituency. And Holi celebrations on Dalal Street as markets cheer. Reliance Banks drives Sensex over 1,000 points. US President Joe Biden names public health specialist Ashish Jha as his White House COVID coordinator. 51-year-old Dr. Jha replaces Jeff Zients next month.
From the break of war,
this is Mariupol. You hear a series. Hear the sound.
through the debris and devastation.
You can hear more blasts that are taking place. We are moving away from this area. We are being told to leave this area because it's not safe to be here. You can hear some blasts that are taking place.
Please close the sky.
Close the sky. That's the message.
Over the roar of war machines.
We're very careful, Pawan, very careful. These are anti-tank mines that are laid on the road here.
Continuous fighting taking place.
No compromise, no half measures.
उन्होंने हमारे ऊपर हथियार तान के रखा है.
This is one of the frontline areas where trenches have been dug up, bunkers have been set. They're all prepared, all set to take on the Russian forces.
Now they are back.
Hello, sir.
The world watched the Ukraine war only on India Today.
And joining me now are Gaurav and Geeta in the studio. Gaurav, your first thoughts of being back. What's the abiding memory that you have over the last 1 month? Share your sort of most durable abiding memory of Ukraine.
A beautiful country, a beautiful people, and devastated, shattered, and they're being shelled every day. They're fighting back. How long can they continue to fight back? Rajdeep, remains the big question. I mean, they may get their switchblades right now from the Americans, and they may get their Javelin ATGMs, but the Russian might is so much that, you know, they last longer. But ultimately, is joining NATO worth it? And that's the question that's being asked even by the people in Ukraine. Is all of this worth it when President Zelensky also now says, I don't want to go to NATO on a bent knee.
But when you were in those cities, was there what? Fear, anger, a mix of both those emotions, families being separated, children being taken out as refugees? What was the dominant feeling you sensed among the common Ukrainian?
Steel will. Steel will. Yes, there is fear. Yes, I mean, there's loss of life and tremendous loss of life. People who've spent their entire life building a home, and they see a missile knock that home down, or their cars, or their neighborhood, or places where they've studied and grown up. Those places resemble, I mean, they've turned into rubble. So their lives are shattered and will stay shattered for a very long time. But there is this steel will that we will defend our country. There is also this realization, was it necessary to get into it in the first place?
Interesting. Geeta, your sense, the human angle, the sheer tragedy that seems to be playing out, families getting separated. Give us anecdote stories that you saw.
Well, Rajdeep, for me, the two big things that we saw with this war is the human cost of war, well-off people living in shelters, homeless because they do not have bunkers. They have homes, but they have to live in shelters. Those who do not have the wherewithal to sustain are moving out. Nobody wants to be a refugee. Let's just put that on record. And every Ukrainian who's leaving Ukraine wants to return. It's not like they actually are looking at a better life in Europe. They all have homes, they're well off, they want to return. So the human cost of war and rebuilding Ukraine is going to take a long, long time.
So again, is there anger? Is there fear? I mean,
absolute anger. But the second point, a very important one, is nationalism that you see. That President Zelensky had support before this war, which was in a way going down, his popularity. And with this war, his popularity went up. And because of that nationalism. Why? Because Putin went beyond Donbass. The day he moved beyond Donbass and declared war is when people thought it is time to defend, because Ukrainians are nationalistic. The party is popular because it is a nationalistic party.
Is there anger against the Russians or against President Putin? Is President Putin seen as the sort of hate enemy figure, or the Russian people?
Putin. Why do I say that? Is because there are so many Russian-speaking, Russian-origin people within Ukraine. So there is hate against Putin, for Putin. But there is also this question that Gaurav says, Rajdeep, which has to do with whether if it was important for Zelensky to really take the country to war when NATO was not offering military intervention, when the European Union or European countries bilaterally have not offered military intervention. Forget about a conglomerate or a bloc. You don't have to be a bloc. No country is offering military intervention. And so there are people who have now started questioning Zelensky's strategy and policy.
One final question, Gaurav, because one of the images that I saw was you were driving a car and there were the sounds of bullets all over. You know, we see these images on TV of bombs, missiles falling, and you were sort of driving a car when it was clear that not too far away from where you were, there was violence taking place. What was that like? I mean, are civilians feeling that their lives are at stake? Did you feel at that moment that you could be a target? So we've seen journalists being shot dead, including some at point blank range.
And we were reporting from those places. We were reporting from Irpin. We were reporting from Bucha. We were reporting from Brovary, where some of these journalists have been targeted. We were shot at when we were in Mariupol. We were trying to flee Mariupol because the Russian shelling was very intense that time. The Russians hadn't moved in. They were about to move in. And, we had to drive out. There was no vehicle, no trains, no nothing. So this lady wanted to go. We, met up with her. I offered to drive her out, to Dnipro. Dnipro is in the line of fire today. So we've been to virtually all these hotspots. Kharkiv, Mariupol, Kiev, Irpin, Bucha. We reported from ground zero, and because we were able to drive, we had mobility and we were not reporting from hotel balconies and lawns and receptions. But yes, like any other journalist or any other individual, we were also in the line of fire as much. But the people there, every civilian virtually is a combatant today. And when Putin says, or when Russia says that they're bombing civilian areas, the Russians say that you have anti-tank missiles or surface-to-air missiles on your rooftops. And they put out those images, whether it's psychological warfare or information warfare. This is what is happening on ground. So when civilians pick up arms, they become, fair game, as the Russians would put it.
After 1 month of you being in Ukraine, missed dal, roti, sabzi or not?
So I didn't. I love the food in Ukraine when we got food. The food there is very good when you get it. When you didn't get it, we survived on bars of chocolates also. And there were times we survived on water. In one day, we actually had to ask somebody for water, knocked on a stranger's door and asked for water because there's nothing to eat, nothing to drink.
Well, to both of you, you've come back on a long flight. There's Holi tomorrow. Have a happy Holi. Stay well, stay safe. And well done by giving us and Indian viewers a sense of what was really happening on the ground. So thank you both very much for joining me this evening. They're safe, but the people of Ukraine are not. This is a country that is now bruised and battered. Today, Russian missiles pounded Kiev and other cities once again. The Ukrainian president has called Russia a terrorist state, while the US President Joe Biden went a step further, labeling Putin a war criminal. The big question is, with the International Court of Justice asking the Russians to stop the war, will the Russian troops pay any heed to the verdict? Or, as Mr. Putin has said, he will strike back even harder. Take a look, and then we'll come back with our big question. Is Putin a war criminal?
Ох ты, ёперный бан.
Till a day ago, this theatre in Mariupol was shelter to hundreds of people, including several children. Today, their fate is unknown. Bombed by Russian forces, the theatre is now a pile of rubble, with parents and children trapped inside. Continuous bombing by Russians has hampered the rescue efforts. Satellite pictures of the theatre taken before the attack showed a message, children, written on their joining grounds, to tell Russians it was a civilian shelter. But it evidently did not stop them. Their advance in Ukraine delayed by days, Russian forces have taken to pounding civilian targets. Markets, makeshift shelters, residential buildings, parents queuing up to buy bread. Nothing and nobody seems to be safe anymore. It's ironic, the tanks and talks are moving parallelly. While the two countries claim to be making progress in negotiations, there is no breather in the battles being waged on the ground. This market in Kharkiv is among the many civilian establishments bombed by the invaders.
Черговий злочин російських військових проти Маріуполя нічим не відрізняється від захоплення Басаєвим лікарні в Будьоновську. Російська держава перетворилась на відвертого терориста. І їй не соромно. Але вона буде відповідати за все. Світ вже починає розуміти, що без визнання Росії державою-терористом
Russia suffered a major setback at the International Court of Justice on Wednesday. The ICJ has ordered Russia to suspend all its military operations and ensure that no military units supported by Kremlin takes further steps in the war. The court also asked both the nations to refrain from any action that may lead to escalation. So far, Russia has ignored the verdict, and Ukraine's Western allies are fuming.
Did you ask me whether I would call? Oh, I think he is a war criminal.
Ukraine is badly bruised, but is taking all the blows on the chin and fighting back. A quick resolution to the war will depend on how fast the two warring neighbors can agree on compromise. Bureau Report, India Today.
Let's raise some big questions. Is Vladimir Putin a war criminal, as is being suggested by the US? Will the ICJ verdict have any impact at all on Russia's march towards Kiev? Will Putin ever be held accountable, particularly for the loss of civilian lives in Ukraine? Joining us now, special guest Alexander Kara is former Ukrainian diplomat. He joins me from Kiev. Gilbert Doctorow is an international affairs expert, joins us from Brussels at the moment. Irfan Nuruddin, Senior Director, South Asia Center, Atlantic Council, is joining me from Washington, D.C. And Tatiana Kukureva is the Deputy Chief at Sputnik News. Appreciate all of you joining us on the show tonight. Let me come to my guest from Kiev first. Your sense of there in Kiev, do you believe that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal? Do you see him as a war criminal today there?
Oh yeah, sure. Affirmative answer, because he has pretty long record of committing crimes against its own people, beginning in the 1999 when he and his special forces bombed the buildings, the apartment buildings in Moscow, to create the pretext of the Second Chechen War, when he committed a lot of crimes against Chechen people, then Syrian crimes, and then since 2000 and since 2014, he's committing crimes in Ukraine, including bringing down MH17, the Malaysian aircraft. Almost 300 people were killed, and I'm talking about all those crimes not related to Ukraine. And certainly the latest attacks since February 24th to 2022, he was deliberately targeting hospitals, the residential areas, the corridors, humanitarian corridors, and the civilian infrastructure.
No, but you believe these are under specific, Mr. Karev, you believe these are under the specific instances of Mr. Putin, that the military commanders are bombing theaters, bombing hospitals, bombing schools? You believe that is under his specific instructions, is it?
Well, the specific instructions were given to shut down the Malaysian aircraft, it's for sure, because it was a special operation of that kind that only Mr. Putin can authorize. Secondly, he knows reports from the military, and they are deliberately targeting schools, hospitals, maternity hospitals, and residential areas. And certainly, if he is, as the commander-in-chief, is not changing the course, it means that he is happy with what's going on the ground. And on top of targeting civilians, he using and his military using prohibited munition like cluster munition, thermobaric weapons, and some other types of weapons. So he cannot employ all those weapons without knowledge that they are prohibited and without knowledge what objects they are targeting.
Tatiana Kukareva, Deputy Chief Sputnik News, you want to give us a Russian perspective to what you've just heard from a Ukrainian diplomat saying, look, Vladimir Putin, in the course of this war, has authorized his military commanders to target civilian areas and therefore should be seen as a war criminal.
Good evening to you. Well, that's not quite what the Ukrainian diplomat has said, is it? First of all, he's voiced one of the most ridiculous conspiracy theories that I've ever heard in my entire life, saying that the residential buildings in Moscow that were blown up years ago were blown up at the command of our own president, which is quite a shameful accusation. But I guess, from what I've heard from the Ukrainian diplomats throughout this whole crisis, you wouldn't be ashamed, would you? Because the lies, they just keep on coming.
But the specifics, the fact is, we can dispute what happened with the bombings of hotels and whether, and you may be right to suggest that it would be far-fetched at this stage to suggest that Mr. Putin would bomb his own hotels to blame the Chechens. But here, you've got a very different situation. On the ground, every day reports are coming now of civilians being targeted, Tatiana.
That's a very good word, reports. And this is what they are, reports. And the difference between reports and actual, if you even want to use the words war crimes, is a very simple matter of proof, first of all. Second of all, if we're going to be talking about war criminals, and if we're going to be talking about who is set to face the judgment, shall we start with former President Poroshenko and President Zelensky in the beginning for killing 13,000 people in the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, for targeting children's beach? That is documented.
Well,
there are pictures, there are documents of that. And obviously the Ukrainian side is now going to say that this wasn't happening because they call it an anti-terror operation, don't they? But what kind of terrorists were there on the children's beach?
But, I'll give a quick response to you, sir, Mr. Karge, before I move ahead. You want to respond to that many would say that the Ukrainians too have had blood on their hands. Nothing justifies this kind of an armed conflict in the 21st century. Let's get that clear. Families are being broken apart. The refugee crisis is the worst ever. But you want to quickly respond, Alexander Kara? to the fact that there are instances
first of
where
all,
your
if we're
Ukrainian
talking
government is
about-
also accused of targeting people, particularly in the Donetsk area?
I am originally from Donetsk, so it's a blatant lie that Ukrainians are killing Ukrainians and that 14,000 Ukrainians are so-called Republicans from Donetsk and Lugansk. It's a blatant lie. It's Ukrainian citizens. And in the first place, it was Russia who illegally annexed Crimea and launched a war, proxy war in Donetsk and Lugansk. But I would like to quote the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Mr. Karim Khan, who said that there is a reasonable basis to believe that both alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed in Ukraine by Russian forces. It's not the Poroshenko, it's not Zelensky saying, but it's an international respectable judge under the auspices of the United Nations. So
Yes.
Let's not talk about lies of Russia.
I've seen the ICJ judgment and it is scathing on the Russians at the moment. But Dr. Gilbert Dautreau, I've read or heard some of what you've been saying in recent times, and you seem to suggest that Russia should not be seen as the villain in dark terms. Why is that? Why do you believe that Russia should not be seen as the villain? The entire international community is slowly coming around to the view that Vladimir Putin is the aggressor. He's got into a war which could have easily been avoided by him. You want to resolve issues, you do not send your tanks in.
All right, let me reply to you and to the others by narrowing the discussion a little bit. The accusation of Putin being a war criminal is not a generalized accusation. It doesn't look back 20 years. It looks at what happened earlier this week. It precisely came up in the context of Mr. Zelensky's address to Congress, and it was pronounced by President Biden and by the Senate in response to the reports of the horrible, horrific bombing of a theater in downtown Mariupol, which was shown to be destroyed, where they had, as your reporter described, the physical situation. But the report which you presented 15 minutes ago was not updated. The updated information, which has been released by Zelensky's office, is that everybody came out alive. They all were staying in a bomb shelter under the theater. Now, that's very interesting. It supports very nicely the Russian explanation that the theater was blown up by the Azov battalion people who had herded these civilians into the theater and then into the bomb shelter. But my point is that the whole story of Mr. Putin being a war criminal because of this heinous crime leads us to a point which interests all of your listeners in India, their possibility of a nuclear war that will kill all of us. Because Mr. Biden, when he was vice president, called Mr. Putin a thug. When he became president and 1 month into his presidency, he said Mr. Putin was a killer. These are very unattractive adjectives, but they're just adjectives. Calling him a war criminal is a different kind of description. That is something actionable. And actionable in what way? It is the basis and justification for arranging the assassination of Mr. Putin. And let us just remember that on March 4th,
isn't that a conspiracy? With due regard, sir, isn't that a conspiracy theory in itself? The fact is, the objective facts on the ground suggest that Mr. Putin has been the aggressor in this war, that civilians have been killed, and therefore someone must pay the price for what is being seen.
Civilians are always killed in wars. That goes without saying.
Yes.
But when the war started, the Western press was saying, the Western governments were saying, this will be horrendous. There'll be hundreds of thousands of casualties. According to the UN, up to 21 days into the war, there have been less than 2,000 civilian casualties. You can question that, but it's not hundreds of thousands. Let's put on our thinking caps and try to be reasonable human beings, not based on what foreign correspondents tell us, but what we can see with our own two eyes.
Sir, but a war criminal is not decided on the basis of whether 100,000 people are killed or 2,000. The fact is, if civilian areas have been targeted, someone must be held accountable.
Well, tell the United States government who is accountable for the millions of people who have died at American soldiers' hands in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq. Let's not talk about this, because it becomes a what's about argument. I'm asking you to put on your thinking cap and save your own neck. Because if they arranged an assassination of Putin, which was called for by a U.S. senator Lindsey Graham on March 4th. This is not a conspiracy theory. That is a fact. Read your newspapers. Mr. Lindsey called for the assassination of Mr. Putin. If the calling him a war criminal,
can I just take that for a moment, Dr. Irfan Nuruddin, who's joining us from Washington. You've just heard what Doctor is saying. Some of it may be contentious, but the facts are also that the United States doesn't come into this debate with clean hands. Today, when Joe Biden calls Vladimir Putin a war criminal, there'll be those who'll say Americans who went into Iraq claiming that there were weapons of mass destruction, Americans who've gone into other parts of the world claiming that they are fighting the just war, cannot come into this debate entirely with clean hands. Who is a war criminal depends on which side of the divide you lie.
That's not entirely right, Rajdeep. I mean, whether or not you're a war criminal is a matter of a legal definition of what it means to commit a war crime. An unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation is a violation of international law. Targeting of civilians and the use of prohibited munitions like cluster bombs, biological or chemical weapons are a matter of violation of international law. That is not about which side you're on. And so the question is whether or not the international community at some point will be able to gather the evidence required in order to make a case that, in fact, the Russian military used weapons that were prohibited by international law. There are already allegations and claims corroborated by credible reporters that munitions that are consistent with cluster bombs have been used. There's been credible
Professor Nuruddin, sorry to interrupt. While you wish away what the Americans did, let's say in Iraq, tomorrow there would be those who'd say George Bush was a war criminal for the manner he prosecuted war in Iraq.
And indeed, Rajdeep, many did, myself included. I mean, I remember in 2003 and 2004 marching in the streets of Ann Arbor, Michigan and Columbus, Ohio, where I was living at the time, joined by many Americans who did in fact accuse America of having violated international law. It was. So this notion that, who amongst us is holier than thou so that we can throw the first stone is not how international law is determined. This is not the United States. Mr. Biden might have an opinion about whether or not Mr. Putin is a war criminal. He is free to express that opinion in a sense. But that doesn't make Putin a war criminal. That will be up to the International Criminal Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice to decide. But the idea that the United States, because of its past sins, as is true of every country in the world, cannot bring an allegation of war criminality against another actor is essentially to say that there is no basis for international law at all. And
that's a fair point. That's a fair point, which was taken exactly up by the ICJ yesterday when they sort of sent a very strong signal to Russia, Dr. Gilbert, because there is a sense that the international community believes the manner in which this war is now being prosecuted violates international conventions. You violate the territorial sovereignty of a country. You're accused now of using cluster bombs. Are you saying all of this is a Western propaganda? All of this is mythical?
I am saying to your listeners that if you, the Indian people, want to survive to the end of this year, you better pay close attention to the call for Mr. Putin to be assassinated, which is implicit in the Washington dialogue. Now, if he is assassinated, the people who survive him will push the button. And that's the end. Das vidanya to all of us. So I would advise you to appeal to your prime minister, who is showing remarkable restraint in these difficult times, to call up his friend Joe in Washington and say, moderate your language, because you're going to bring the roof down on us all.
Is that true, Irfan Nuruddin, that there are those in Washington who have openly called for an insurrection of sorts against Vladimir Putin?
Look, with much
and his
respect
assassination?
to you, I have no idea how to even begin to respond to that set of comments. Lindsey Graham did say something, did call for the assassination. He was criticized not just by the mainstream press, he was criticized by even more lunatic fringe of his own party, who basically accused him of being irresponsible and speaking out of turn. He is a member of the opposition. The notion that what Lindsey Graham wants is a matter of U.S. foreign policy is completely ludicrous on its own head. And the idea that even if an assassination was carried out, that this would necessarily lead to nuclear holocaust, is a chain of logic I cannot follow. What I can tell you is that there is no serious conversation about assassination over here. There is a support for Ukraine and a hope that peace will come through diplomatic measures. That's where we are.
Tatiana Kukureva, you want to respond? Surely in this war, Russia cannot play victim. This is not a war where Russia can claim victim. The best you can say is that, there were certain commitments that were made through NATO in the 1990s. They've not been observed. None of it justifies the kind of war Putin is waging. There's a proportionality principle in international law, which Vladimir Putin is not following. Otherwise, tomorrow, anyone can walk into any country because you do not agree with a particular stand that the country has taken or the alliances that a country is forging. If Ukraine was intending to join NATO, that cannot be a reason to bomb a country out of shape.
No, Rajdeep. And first of all, Russia has never tried to play victim, and nor it was ever intending to. I don't believe that a country this big would even play victim in any case of scenario. And it is not about NATO. Obviously, I hope you know that by law, the country with an open military conflict within itself cannot join NATO. It's a technicality, but it's true. On the other hand, it's not about that. It is about the deaths of thousands of people, of 13,000 people that my Ukrainian counterparts apparently seem to have forgotten about. It is about the fact that the Azov battalion that is right now being smoked out of the city of Mariupol is very well-known Nazi formation, and its crimes are documented in the UN. The Office of the High, it has been documented within the.
No, are you saying Ukrainians are killing their own? Are you saying, Tatiana Kukureva, that the Ukrainians are killing their own? Surely not.
Of course they were. Of course they were, and they are, and they continue to be. I mean, come on. This is the magical situation in this whole conflict, is that the whole world seemed to have forgotten the whole period from 2014 up to 2022. The 8 years, the very, very ugly beginning of the rule of Poroshenko, who, by the way, came to power in a completely illegal military coup. Well, it's not a military coup, it was a violent coup with a deadly one. And then the paramilitary formations, the Azov battalion, the right sector. You can watch the documentaries. Back in 2014 and 2015, every single European channel actually made documentaries about the Nazi formation and neo-Nazi formations in Ukraine, which they've very conveniently forgotten about.
Kara, these are again serious accusations. I've heard them before on global channels as well. You want to respond?
Well, certainly it's such a blatant lie about Nazi rule in Ukraine. Having the Jewish president of Ukraine in predominantly Ukrainian country, it's something terrible to have a Nazi regime here. Firstly. Secondly, had not Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, all those lives, 14,000 of my countrymen, including my native city now occupied by Russians, was restored and was in place. But first of all, Putin claimed that his so-called limited military operation was because Ukraine was committing genocide. It was a reason why on the 26th of February, we appealed to International Criminal Court. And that is why yesterday International Criminal Court issued a statement that Russia should stop its war against us, because there is no real ground for this accusation of genocide committed against Russian speakers like myself.
Right.
And
are you saying to me, Mr. Karev, that Vladimir Putin is no different to a Slobodan Milosevic, that he is no different to a Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian leader, that he is no different to a Charles Taylor, the former Liberian president, he is no different to Chad's former dictator, Hussein Habre? All of these have been accused of being war criminals and been seen as war criminals imprisoned. Are you saying that's what Ukraine wants to see? Do you really believe that's conceivable? It's one thing to resort to rhetoric saying Putin is a war criminal, But do you believe that the world will believe him as a war criminal? ICJ has not called him a war criminal. They've said Russia must stop the war. They've not declared Putin a war criminal. That's what Joe Biden said.
Well, I'm talking about the judicial stuff, not the political, because what Mr. Lindsey Graham was talking about and President Joe Biden is the political stuff. And I'm talking about the International Criminal Court, where these facts of possible crimes against humanity and war crimes are going to be investigated. And what I'm saying, certainly Mr. Putin is not going to be tried, because I don't believe that Russia is a democratic state and there is any possibility to trial its leader. But the most important thing that, yes, he has a nuclear button and he has veto power within United Nations Security Council. That's why he is pretty safe to avoid responsibility for all those crimes committed in Ukraine since 2014, and especially since 2022, when he began to target civilians and he began to use all those prohibited weapons. So I'm saying that we need to have to bring him to justice in a way that he is accused of what he has done to us. Not, I don't believe that there is a possibility to try him. If there is a peaceful change of power in Russia and there is a democratic, let's say, ruler of Russia, there is a possibility to try him and to bring to justice. But
Tatiana, you want to respond quickly to that? That there should be, that the Russian people, the Ukrainians are effectively calling on the Russian people to effect a peaceful transition. Russia seems to want a regime change in Ukraine, that Zelensky must go, Ukraine must assert its neutral status. On the other hand, the Ukrainians are saying it's the Russians who must effect a peaceful transition. Today, as my reporters told me, the anger is not against the Russian people, it's against President Putin.
I am sorry to say this, but that is such a lie that you have no idea of the magnitude of this lie. I mean, if you speak Russian and you'd come to Kiev during these past 8 years, you would be easily seated in a cab with a bumper sticker saying you should kill all Russians. That's a matter of fact. In the meantime, the Ukrainian side, for some reason, is trying to say that, and that's a very low blow, actually. When President Zelensky first said it, it kind of felt dirty even to begin with, appealing to Russian people in Russian, and suddenly he spoke Russian for the first time in a long time, trying to incite a rebellion inside a neighboring state, which is predominantly supporting the military operation. Because we know exactly how much this nationalist-based doctrine was set against the Russian people, against the Russian speakers. I have friends inside East Ukraine, and by the way,
ma'am, it is the Russians who invaded Crimea in 2014. It's the Russians who entered Ukraine. They are the aggressors. You can't claim, as I said, that you're the innocents here.
But it was not Ukraine. How can you say it's Ukraine? The right of a people to self-determination is one of the cardinal rules. It's enshrined in the UN. It is a basic principle of democracy, of a democratic society, a right of a people to self-determination.
Sure. Every people have the right to self-determination, but that cannot be invoked, ma'am, but that cannot, I take your point about self-determination, it cannot be invoked by war, it cannot be invoked by walking into another country.
By war. Were you in Crimea in 2014?
Okay.
It was not invoked by war. There was a referendum and people voted for this.
It was a special operation of the Russian special forces. And actually, Putin confirmed that it was a beginning. He launched this operation. And you should not call this sham referendum as a referendum. It was a legal annexation. And just 10 friends like Cuba, Iran, Northern Korea supported you during the vote at the UN General Assembly on the 27th of March 2014. So it's a lie that it was a self-determination. It was an illegal annexation, like in Donbass as well.
Can I get final words from you, Dr. Nuruddin? There, America can do all the hand-wringing and call him a war criminal. It's it might make for headlines, but at the end of the day, what does it really mean? How far are the Americans willing to go to ensure that Mr. Putin is made to pay the price for what's happened?
I think what we're going to see once there's peace is that there will be evidence gathered. I don't see a prosecution coming unless there's very strong evidence of the kind that is unlikely to be there. But what this is doing is that the international community, we made it about America, but 40 different international nations have filed a case to the ICJ. This is not just about the US. It's too convenient to make it just about Mr. Biden and his comments. But what we're doing is raising the stakes of what it means to support or stand silent in the conflict right now. That has implications for other countries, including, of course, India, right? I mean, so if in fact evidence begins to mount that Putin and his forces used weapons that were illegal under international law, supporting Putin or staying silent carries a different stake than if in fact that evidence is not found.
But that
None
evidence,
of this is ever proven in the
has
context of an active war.
Sure, that evidence has to be investigated. That evidence that the kind of weaponry that has been used is a violation of international conventions, Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, is still to be investigated. If it is found that Vladimir Putin has used the kind of weapons that cause civilian casualties deliberately, will you then change your mind to call him a war criminal?
Absolutely not. There are always two sides to the story. The other side of the story is the violation of international law by the Ukrainian side by embedding military units in civilian buildings, in civilian infrastructure. That is all by itself a violation of international law. So you will find one side calling the other side black, and the side that's called black will call the other side black, and they'll both be right. The end result will be a draw. And zero.
No, the end result will be the loss of many lives, Dr. Doctorow. You know, information war is part of war, but the end result, as we are seeing, is the largest refugee crisis that Europe has seen in decades. The end result of that is families are being separated from each other. The human costs of war, surely, Dr. Doctorow, is enough reason for people to recognize the costs of war.
The human costs of war are vastly exaggerated by the Western press. Yes, there are 3 million refugees. What you're ignoring is that perhaps 5 million people left Ukraine in the last 10 years. And many of them went to where the new refugees are coming. They went to Poland for reasons of proximity, language closeness, and opportunity. How many of those who are now in Poland will stay there is uncertain. But the fact is that the new arrivals are receiving treatment which the old arrivals, who came 10 years ago, would have dreamed of. Receiving immediate housing, immediate
So if my house is bombed, I will... But the fact is there are huge costs that are being paid. As always, this is not about heroes and villains. The truth lies in shades of grey. But the fact is there is much that Vladimir Putin also has to answer at the moment. Whether he's a war criminal or not should go through a proper process where the International Court of Justice, based on evidence, must decide that, not on the basis of claims made by either side. For now, I appreciate getting 4 contrarian different voices from different parts of the world. Wonderful to have Kiev connecting to Moscow, at least on Indian TV. I hope that the two of you can talk to each other, maybe in happier times, both in Kiev and Moscow. Thank you all very much for joining me, though, here on the news today. Time for a break. On the other side, we'll bring you some good news. You're watching the news today. News without the noise.
Rahul Kanwal, 23 years of experience, 5 conflicts covered, unmatched time in war zone.
The first embedded operation in the history of Indian television journalism.
Gaurav Sawant, 28 years of reporting, 8 conflicts covered, unmatched hours in conflict areas.
Actual firing is taking place, the grads are firing.
Shivarur, 19 years of reporting, 5 conflicts covered, unmatched view of international crossfires.
And the attack guns are firing away.
Geeta Mohan, 18 years of reporting, 3 conflicts covered, When the world is at war, there is no compromise on India today.
Did you ever notice the walking style of Russian President Vladimir Putin? The way he walks with his right arm held rigid while his left arm swings freely. Technically, this kind of move is called clearly reduced right-sided arm swing. The British Medical Journal had published this study in 2015. In the study, the team of neurologists had studied his walking style and said that he dons a strange gunslinger's move. So where did he learn this style from? Researchers estimate that when Putin used to spy in the KGB of the Soviet Union, it was then that he must have learned to walk like this during weapons training. According to the researchers, Putin's walking style fits as per KGB training manual. Let's also tell you that Putin rose from the rank of a spy in KGB to the rank of a lieutenant colonel. KGB operatives are told to hang the weapon in their right hand, leaning to one side, move rapidly with the opposite leg extended. This also increases the speed of walking. Researchers also said that Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, former Russian defense ministers Anatoly Serdyukov, Sergei Ivanov, and a military commander have been seen in such moves. Neurologist and movement disorder specialist Bastian Bloem had led this study. In one of his interviews, he'd said that this is an unusual study, but at the same time, it's a very serious question for neurological observation.
When it's the world's biggest news story, there's only one gold standard of journalism. You.
Let's bring you a good news story. It's been a long time since we brought you a nice good news story. Ever wondered what happens to the security force dogs once they retire from service? Well, India today has found out that the four-legged soldiers are now being looked after well by the forces till their very lifespan. And these dogs are now even having post-retirement benefits by being therapy dogs. Take a look.
A dog is man's best friend, they say. How true? These dogs have helped the security forces fight crime almost their entire lives. So when they quit service, usually at the age of 7 to 11, they are given many retirement benefits.
इनके साथ सुबह से शाम तक घुल मिल के रहते हैं, इनकी साफ सफाई, इनको घुमाना, इनको खाना खिलाना, सुबह से शाम तक यही रूटीन है हमारा, इनके साथ रहते हैं। और भी लोग आते हैं, हमारे फौज के भी लोग आते हैं, सिविलियन भी आते हैं, वो खेलते हैं, तो ये भी खुश होते हैं ना।
This ITBP old age shelter for dogs was opened 2 years ago on the orders of the Home Ministry.
भिन्न इंडिया की भिन्न प्रकार की जगह पर पार्ट्स पर जो है जो अपना ट्रेड के हिसाब से भरपूर अपना जो है ड्यूटी निभाए हैं। जहाँ तक यूटिलिटी होती है, इनके हेल्थ अगर फिट होती है तो दे आर बीइंग यूटिलाइज, पूरा प्रॉपर यूटिलाइज करते। उसके बाद जो है गृह मंत्रालय के आदेश से यहाँ पे ओल्ड एज होम खोला गया था। लगभग ये 2 साल हो गए हैं।
The four-legged soldier continues to contribute to the society even after the retirement. They now take the role of therapy dogs. They are often sent to hospitals to meet patients or to schools to meet children. The mission? To make them happy and cheerful. With Kamaljeet Kaur Sandhu, Bureau Report, India Today.
Nice story there. Let's leave you tonight with 2 images. Ukraine has seen bloodshed and destruction in the last 3 weeks. A war that has impacted and left scars on children especially. A 2-year-old toddler, Theodore, in this video tells us just how scared he is every time the siren comes. Take a look.
Sirena. Sirena. Сирена. Инга, ты боишься? Прятаться. Куда ты прячешься? Боюсь. Сирена. Сирена.
The human costs of war that we keep reiterating. Time to wrap up the show, but remember tomorrow's Holi, the festival of colors is here. We leave you wishing you a very happy and safe Holi. Stay well, stay safe. Take care, good night, Shubhratri. Namaskar.
As Russia declared war on Ukraine, as the world was plunged again into crisis, with the only Indian team in the real war zone.
This is Mariupol. You hear a series. Hear this sound.
I will show you a quick, so to say, bombshell room tour.
I can smell the gunpowder in the air.
And without pause, India Today totally dominates viewership and smashes the competition. When it's the world's biggest news story, there's only one gold standard of journalism.
43 planes, 700 cars, 15 helicopters, 20 palaces and villas. These aren't assets of a small nation, of course. All these are owned by one man, the Russian President Vladimir Putin. It is not a secret that Russian President Vladimir Putin hoards tremendous wealth with an exotic and luxurious lifestyle that he lives. Putin is always grabbing headlines owing to his luxurious lifestyle. His lavish super yacht tops that list. According to reports, the president of Russia has a super yacht named Graceful, worth a whopping 750 crore rupees. His super yacht comes with a helipad, a dining area and cocktail bar. 400 bottles of the most luxurious wines from around the world are kept in its cellar. Apart from this, Putin has 43 planes, 700 cars, 15 helicopters. When Putin wants to travel by air, he likes to hop on to his special aircraft designed in the neoclassical style. Reportedly, this plane is worth $390 million, which is about 3,000 crore rupees. It has been named Flying Kremlin, which means Flying Office of the President of Russia. According to a media report, the plane also has a toilet seat made of gold, worth about 35 lakh rupees. This aircraft is like a flying palace. Apart from the gym, bar and 3 bedrooms, it has all facilities needed for Putin to control the army while he's traveling. Political critic Boris Nemtsov compiled a dossier that alleged Putin even has 4 yachts secretly docked around Russia. Nemtsov has added that Russia's leader even has a watch collection that's worth about $8,91,500, which includes one that is about $5,35,000 alone. Did you ever wonder how much this powerful leader draws as his income? According to the office of the Russian president, the Kremlin, Putin gets a salary of $1.4 lakh, which is roughly around 1.5 crore rupees. However, according to a website that tracks the net worth of popular celebrities, Putin's annual salary is currently about $2.4 lakh, that is about 1.8 crore rupees. But these are just official reports. The Russian president reportedly earns a lot more than that. Multiple properties have been linked to Putin in recent years. Some reports say that he now owns homes worth more than $1.78 billion. Putin owns about 20 palaces and villas in and around Russia, including Finland, Moscow, Europe, and many other places. Many media reports also claim that he is the world's richest man with a secret wealth around $285 billion as fortune and is said to be living like a king. Well, his possessions speak and can probably convince anyone to agree with.
You are watching India Today.
Anupam Kher starrer The Kashmir Files is a fictional tale that highlights atrocities against Kashmiri Pandits in the 1990s.
जितने भी कश्मीरी पंडितों से मैं मिला, उनका जो सबसे बड़ा दुख और मलाल है, मुझसे सब लोगों ने अलग अलग तरह से बोला, अगर पाकिस्तान से टेररिस्ट आके हमारे साथ ये करते, जो ऐसा नहीं है कि वो करते तो एक बार समझ भी सकते थे, पर हमारा कत्ल करने वाले हमारे पड़ोसी, हमारे स्टूडेंट्स, हमारी फिल्म देखिएगा आप, स्टूडेंट्स ने किया है, जिन टीचरों ने उन्हें पढ़ा के BA MA किया है, हमारे दोस्त सहेलियां, इन लोगों ने किया है, जो हमारे घर में आके खेलते थे बच्चे, जरा से इतने से हमारे घर में, जिनने घुटनों चलना सीखा, जब वो बड़े हो गए, मूछें आ गई, उन्होंने आके हमारे पति को मार दिया। ये जो गम है, अपनों ने ही हमको मारा, वो गम जो है मुझे लगता नहीं है इनके जीते जी कभी इनके दिल से निकल सकता।
वो अमानवीय लोग हैं, उनमें, उनके दिल में, उनके शरीर में दिल नहीं है, राक्षस हैं। क्योंकि आप कैसे इंसान महसूस करते हैं कि आप इंसान हैं, जब आपका किसी के लिए, आपका दूसरे का दुख आपको अपना दुख लगता है, तो लगता है कि आप इंसान हैं, ह्यूमैनिटी में बिलीव करते हैं, आप लोगों की तकलीफ में बिलीव करते हैं। तो जिन लोगों में दूसरे के दुख के प्रति कोई दुख व्यक्त नहीं होता है, उनके बारे में हम क्या बात करें?
The film on the exodus of Hindus from Kashmir in the 1990s has kicked up a storm in India.
जब मैं स्क्रिप्ट पढ़ा तो मैं न्यूयॉर्क में रह रहा था उस समय, और मैं अकेला 36th फ्लोर पे था, तो मैं बहुत रोया था, क्योंकि बहुत दिनों बाद उस सपने को पूरा होता देख रहा था कि जो 32 साल से नहीं हुआ था, कि किसी ने हमारी आवाज़ सुनी ही नहीं थी। उसमें मैंने अपने दादाजी को देखा था, मैंने अपने पिताजी को देखा था, जो मेरा नाम है इस फिल्म में पुष्कर नाथ, वो मेरे पिताजी का नाम था। और आई थॉट दैट दिस इज़ द बेस्ट वे टू गिव अ ट्रिब्यूट टू नॉट ओनली माई पेरेंट्स, माई फादर एंड माई ग्रैंडफादर एंड माई अदर अंकल्स, बट ये बेस्ट तरीका है कि मैं उन 5 लाख लोगों को, उनके दर्द को दुनिया तक पहुंचा सकूं थ्रू द कैरेक्टर ऑफ पुष्कर नाथ पंडित।
It even made it to the parliament.
जो लोग हमेशा फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन के झंडे लेकर के घूमते हैं, वो पूरी जमात बौखला गई है पिछले 5-6 दिन से। और ये फिल्म का तथ्यों के आधार पर, आर्ट के आधार पर उसकी विवेचना करने के बजाय उसको डिस्क्रेडिट करने के लिए बड़ा मुहिम चला है, आपने देखा होगा।
प्रधानमंत्री का ऐसे बड़े मंच से बोलना, ये बहुत बड़ी बात है, और मैं बहुत आशावादी आदमी हूँ। मुझे लगता है कि चीज़ें होती हैं, देर ज़रूर होती है, लेकिन होती हैं। तो आज जब हम यहाँ आंसू बहा रहे हैं, ये दुख के तो हैं ही, मगर उससे ज़्यादा इस बात के हैं कि हमारे दुख को किसी ने पहचाना।
You are watching India.
Hello and welcome. You're watching world's largest coverage of Russia-Ukraine war. I'm Rajesh Pawar, and joining me in this broadcast are Maria Pisarenko and Sergei Mirankov. Over the next half an hour, we will bring you unparalleled stories from the ground in war zone.
It's very close. It was just on top of us, everybody on the ground.
In the peaceful city Kyiv, which is now turned into a battleground by the Russian troops.
Amid the fierce battle of Kyiv, back to back, shelling now has started to rock the heart of the city.
3 war reporters, 1 unmissable broadcast.
This is a building behind me, which has been bombed just a few minutes back.
The death, the destructions, and the end of everything that was normal. The terrible tragedy of Ukraine is visible.
Unparalleled stories of war from ground. Russia and Ukraine on the negotiation table. Peace breakthrough on the cards. Ukraine battered, bloodied, and bruised.
It's day 22 of Russia's offensive on Ukraine. 3 weeks on, the country has seen unprecedented death and destruction on its once bustling streets. Kharkiv has suffered the most in this war. It has been the worst hit city in Ukraine. And Russia continues its attack, targeting even civilians. In Mariupol, where a bomb shelter was attacked, Ukrainians have put up exceptional resistance to the Russians. Ukraine is showing unmatched fighting spirit.
Markets on fire. Schools shelled. Back-to-back strikes. Ukraine continues to face the unsparing onslaught by Putin's army. As Russia continues its invasion, there's bloodbath on the streets of Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol, and many other cities and towns spread across Ukraine. The second biggest city of Kharkiv paints a picture of destruction. Airstrikes that rocked marketplaces left buildings on fire, smoldering and charred. The relentless attacks by Putin's forces didn't even spare schools. Plumes of smoke were seen emerging from a school that lies in ruins and totally devastated. Another badly hit city, Mariupol, has bodies lying on the streets. Target of multiple daily attacks, the city witnessed massive strike on a drama theatre where hundreds of civilians had taken shelter. The sprawling building was reduced to a pile of debris with hundreds trapped. As the Russian army advances towards the capital, attacks on Kyiv's suburbs continue. Residential buildings were seen on fire, with locals struggling to flee using destroyed bridges. Casualties continue to rise.
The Russian state has become an outspoken terrorist, and it is not ashamed. But it will be responsible for everything. The world is already beginning to understand that without the recognition of Russia as a terrorist state, it will be impossible to restore justice for Ukraine. It will be impossible to restore international order.
Today, in other apartments building.
Boxing legend and Kyiv mayor Vitaly Klitschko didn't mince words, saying Russia is ruthlessly attacking civilians and not just military establishments.
Putin says he's only targeting military targets.
Bullshit. Sorry. Where is military target? This building is military target.
It's day 22 of the invasion, and Russia continues to attack cities, causing heavy damage. The city of Kharkiv continues to be worst hit. A market in Kharkiv was bombed, following which the fire raged on for hours, with smoke engulfing the nearby buildings as well.
Sviatoslav Yurash, who was earlier seen taking up a gun against Russian forces, suffered a massive personal tragedy as he lost his girlfriend Alexandra in a Russian attack.
She will remain that voice which will be speaking to the world every single day from now on.
This hospital in Mariupol is the last one standing in the ruined city, with all others bombed out. Bodies are piling up as those doctors couldn't save are lined up in the basement since the mortuary in the city is full to the brink. The bodies include those of infants who are grievously hurt. But the Ukrainians refuse to give up, inflicting significant damage on Russian military, targeting Russian tanks firing at shelters across the city of Mariupol. Ukrainian army also shot down a Russian chopper, valiantly fighting back and against insurmountable odds. With Rajesh Pawar and Seri Mirankov in Kyiv, Bureau Report, India Today.
Let's now go to my colleague Maria Pisarenko, who has been tracking situation on ground.
Thank you, Rajesh. The Russian invasion has left the country already in ruins. Houses burned, commercial establishment destroyed. The horrifying visuals that have emerged show the significant damage to Ukrainian cities. Take a look at this report.
Captivating cathedrals, marvelous monasteries, historic monuments, and cities with grand landscapes. This was Ukraine for tourists holidaying in Europe's second largest country. Charred, engulfed in smoke, raging fire. Once brimming with life, markets, schools, and commercial establishments have now been reduced to rubble. The Russian assault on Ukraine paints a picture of massive devastation and destruction. The city of Mariupol has suffered significant damage to the urban infrastructure. The before and after images show the destruction that have been caused by the Russian troops. The residential buildings, commercial establishments destroyed beyond recognition in back-to-back attacks. In Mariupol, this drama theatre, serving as a shelter for hundreds of civilians, was bombed by Russian troops. The theatre, once home to nights of revelry and art, is now a ghost shelf of itself, with rescuers racing against time to extricate those lying under debris. Another city that has been hit the hardest is Chernihiv. After deadly attacks hit the city for weeks, the streets are filled with bodies. Horrifying images of locals carrying the injured and dead have surfaced that show the fatal aftermath of the attacks. A town in Donetsk region, Makivka, is in ruins. Residential buildings and markets are charred due to repeated shellings and missile attacks by the Russian army. Locals were seen coming together to repair the damage caused by the brutal Russian attacks. Once one of Europe's most beautiful countries, Ukraine lies in ruins. Its body battered, its spirit hurt, and soul aspiring for an end to the naked dance of aggression. Bureau Report, India Today.
Is a peace deal breakthrough between Ukraine and Russia on the cards? Sergei Mirankov tells us more.
Thank you, Maria. After 3 weeks of waging war, Ukraine and Russia are finally on the negotiation table. After 4 rounds of inconclusive talks, the two nations have come down to a 15-point peaceful plan. Will the delegators from the both sides nations broker truce?
After 21 days of raging war, there is some hope for truce. Russia and Ukraine are finally in a mood to negotiate. After 4 inconclusive rounds of talks, the 5th one seemed to be a step in the direction of peace. Russia and Ukraine are now trying to chalk out a compromise formula, including neutrality status for Ukraine as one of the options. Under neutral status, Ukraine would become part of European Union, but not NATO, like Austria and Sweden. Kremlin has given the green signal to this option.
Он сейчас, по большому счету, он сейчас всерьез обсуждается в увязке, конечно же, с гарантиями безопасности. Это ровно то, что вот президент Путин говорил в феврале на одной из своих пресс-конференций. Любые возможные варианты, любые общеприемлемые.
Kyiv, however, has ruled out the Russian proposal. Ukraine wants a legally binding security pact signed by international partners. Ukrainian and Russian delegations have come up with the 15-point tentative peace plan. It lists the issue that needs to be resolved before a compromise. These include Ukraine declaring neutrality, limiting the Ukrainian armed forces, renouncing Kyiv's ambitions to join NATO, and prohibiting Ukraine from hosting foreign military bases in exchange of security. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has claimed the talks are heading in the right direction.
Це важливо. Складно, але важливо, тому що будь-яка війна завершується угодою. Зустрічі тривають. Як мені доповідають, позиції на переговорах звучать вже реалістичніше. Проте ще необхідний час, щоб рішення були в інтересах саме України.
While talks are going on, Russia's relentless bombing of Ukraine continues. The question everyone is asking now is, how soon can the two warring nations reach an agreement? Bureau Report, India Today.
If this dialogue continues between Russia and Ukraine, what are the possible results of these talks? Rajesh, tell us.
Russia-Ukraine war has now been raging for 3 weeks. Russian forces continue to rain missiles on Ukraine. Outmanned and outgunned, Ukrainians are still holding their fort. While the diplomatic talks are on, the world is asking when and how this war will end. India Today decodes the 10 possible scenarios in which the war may end. Here is a report.
Three weeks and peace is still a distant dream in Ukraine. Cities continue to be bombarded relentlessly by Russian missiles. As the humanitarian crisis deepens, India Today decodes the 10 possible scenarios in which the war could end. Scenario 1. Putin bombs Ukraine into submission at a massive human cost and installs a puppet government in Kyiv. Scenario 2. Zelensky is forced to quit and a new government takes over in Ukraine. Scenario 3. Kyiv is made neutral, irrespective of who rules it, or Ukraine is demilitarized like Austria. Scenario 4. Putin is forced to halt what he calls military operations with altered status quo, allowing talks and diplomacy to take effect. Scenario 5. Ukraine is forced to recognize the two breakaway regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, as well as Kherson, as independent regions captured by Russian forces. Scenario 6. Putin escalates war by using chemical weapons or targeting West's arms depots in neighboring Poland, prompting NATO to get involved in the war directly. Scenario 7. Putin scales back his goals in the face of a crumbling domestic economy, and Ukraine becomes what Afghanistan was to Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev, or the US and its allies after 2001. Scenario 8. Ukraine registers an unlikely heroic victory with continued little weapon support and humanitarian aid supplies from the West. Scenario 9. Sanctions by the West cripple Russia's economy, making Putin extremely unpopular, leading to an uprising in his country or even a coup taking place. Scenario 10. Cornered by NATO and the European Union and depleted of weaponry, a frustrated Putin goes for nuclear strikes, potentially leading to World War III and widespread catastrophe. Bureau Report, India Today.
To counter Russian death drones, which are creating havoc in Ukrainian lines, the United States is now supplying Ukraine with switchblade drones, which work on suicide mode. The small drones carry warheads which detonate on impact. Russia, on its part, has been using stealth suicide drones to attack the Ukrainian army.
Ukraine standing up to Moscow's offensive despite weeks of ravaging assault, showing unparalleled courage and spirit rarely seen in recent times. Showing it can be a match to Moscow's superior military might and far sophisticated weaponry, but Russia on its part has been using stealthy suicide drones to attack the Ukrainian army. These unmanned drones, evading radar and traditional air defense system, can slip past enemy line of fire. This devil in the sky is lethal, using loitering munitions which wait passively in the air, hovering over the target before coming down in one deathly swoop. The drone falls head first along a vertical trajectory similar to kamikazes, a Japanese aircraft loaded with explosives and making a deliberate suicidal crash on an enemy target. Russia is using these drones to make precision attacks on military targets in Ukraine. Each of them packs a small explosive charge up to 3 kgs. Targets are fed into the drone or through an image uploaded on its control system. The drone then finds its target and drops itself to blow the target into smithereens. These loitering munition drones are multi-purpose and used as part of a swarm of drones, flying silently as fast as 130 km per hour with a flight duration of 30 minutes. To counter Russian death drones, the US is now supplying Ukraine with switchblade drones, which works in similar kamikaze fashion. The small drones made by AeroVironment Ammunition Major carrying warhead detonate on impact. Bureau Report, India Today.
That's all we have for you on this edition of the special broadcast. For more news and latest updates, keep watching India Today.
As Russia declared war on Ukraine, as the world was plunged again into crisis, with the only Indian team in the real war zone.
This is Mariupol. You hear a series. Hear this sound.
I will show you a quick, so to say, bombshell room tour.
I can smell the gunpowder in the air.
And without pause, India Today totally dominates viewership and smashes the competition. When it's the world's biggest news story, there's only one gold standard of journalism.
Should they provide military or other assistance that, of course, violates sanctions or supports the war effort, that there will be significant consequences.
针对中国的虚假信息，用心险恶。中方在乌克兰问题上的立场是一贯的明确的。
зараз я повторюю знову, якщо ви не закриєте наше небо, то це лише питання часу, коли російські ракети впадуть вже на вашу територію, на територію НАТО, на домівки громадян країн НАТО.
International isolation aside, Russia is also facing allegations of war crimes. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is pointing towards similar allegations and possibly filing a lawsuit against Russia for war crimes committed in the ongoing fight with Ukraine. Amnesty International, which is a human rights organization, also analyzed digital evidence, including photographs, videos, and satellite imagery of these attacks in Ukraine. They have verified violations of international law which could amount to war crimes. There's horror in war, loss of human lives, and guns fired with practically no rule whatsoever. But accountability exists, and so does war crimes. But what are these violations we're really talking about? Isn't everything fair in love and war, as they say? Well, not quite. Modern warfare has certain laws to keep according to international law. It's usually referred to as the law of war by the international community. The laws of war regulate the conditions for initiating war and conduct of warring parties. The laws of war define sovereignty, nationhood, states and territories, occupation, and other critical terms of law. It was Henry Dunant, the founder of the Red Cross, who began the process of codifying these customs into international humanitarian laws. But can a war be justified really? Well, according to the international standards, a war is only just if it is fought for a reason that is justified and that carries sufficient moral weightage. The country that wishes to use military force must demonstrate that there is just reasons and cause to do so. Now, as we see in modern times, wars to defend the innocent are increasingly regarded as just. The clearest example of a just cause is self-defense against an aggressor. For example, when an enemy has crossed your borders and invaded your territory. And other justifications here include assisting a friendly nation which has been invaded, when there is human rights violations, and to punish an act of aggression. Laws of war also dictate what is considered as war crimes. There are international standards for war crimes which are outlined in international treaties like the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and the Rome Statute.
You are watching
It's now time to see some of those haunting images that has convulsed the whole wide world. Here are 3 people who were killed, 5 wounded after shelling caused a fire at a market area in eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. These images on your screens here show the extent of destruction after heavy shelling by Russian troops. You can see fire all over, plumes of smoke and charred vehicles from this war-torn zone. Russian occupiers have shelled a school in Kharkiv. You can see the damaged school building and a series of damaged cars. There is no sign of human life. 3 trees there that have been completely uprooted, piles of rubble, scattered lumps of concrete left behind after the attack. A moment of horror caught on cameras. Images on your screens here show heavy shelling by Russian forces in Kharkiv late last night. Russian shelling and bombing led to multiple explosions in Kharkiv. Several buildings and vehicles were destroyed in this attack. Ukraine continues to fight back. On your screens here is wrecked parts of a crashed Russian aircraft which was shot down by the Ukrainian troops in Mykolaiv. No confirmations of belongings of the pilot as yet. And devastating scenes coming at the last hospital in Mariupol, the port city. The lone hospital standing as all others have been bombed out by Russia. You can see bodies that have been piled up all over the place. The dead includes large numbers of infants and women. Russian troops dropped a powerful bomb on a theater in the encircled Ukrainian port city of Mariupol. According to reports, more than 1,000 people, including women and children, were taking shelter at that time. It's unfortunate no exact number of casualties has been reported yet, but this footage here on your screen shows the destruction of that theater once after it was bombed.
Вот, блядь, смотрите, пидорасы, блядь.
Overnight shelling wreaks havoc in Kharkiv. Images on your screens here show you moments when city was attacked by Russian forces. You can see buildings and shops on fire. Huge plumes of smoke can also be seen coming from those destroyed buildings. And the Ukrainian media has now released a video on Wednesday claiming Russian troops opened fire on people who were standing in line for bread in the Ukrainian city of Chernihiv. The video on your screens here shows dead bodies lying on the ground. Ukraine's media has claimed that at least 10 people were killed in this incident. India today, independently, have not been able to verify this video. The Russian Defense Ministry released a video on Wednesday. It shows armored vehicles, tanks and other military equipment, including foreign-made anti-tank rocket launchers, allegedly captured by Russian troops. And these images are from the capital city of Kiev. Ukrainians getting rescued after Russian troops attacked at a residential area. According to reports, one person has been killed in the attacks. 3 of them have been injured. Emergency service departments right now trying to manage and evacuate at least 30 people from that building that has now come under constant shelling by Russian forces.
The incentives help you build up, but once they're taken away, you're no longer globally competitive. Is that a fear?
Your point is absolutely right, that yes, the scheme is only there for for let's say 5 years. And I think that's the challenge in front of the industry, that we need to ensure that we are globally competitive in these 5 years and we don't depend on any of these subsidies or the schemes.
Presented by eBix Cash. हर खुशी के लिए काफी है. Co-presented by CoinDCX, your gateway to crypto. Co-powered by Green Lamb Laminates, Gustakhi Saaf.
Hello and welcome. You're with us on Business Today. I'm Abha Bakaya. Here are the headlines tonight. Holi celebrations on Dalal Street. Market gains 2%. Reliance banks drive the Sensex 1,047 points higher. Nifty ends above 17,250. All sectors in the green. Rupee appreciates more than 40 paise against the dollar, closes below the 76 mark. Analysts expect the Indian currency to strengthen further after the Fed rate hike. US Fed hikes rates for the first time since 2018, promises 6 more this year, making it the fastest rate hike cycle in decades. Paytm plunges over 6% as Macquarie slashes price target by 36%. Brokerage house cuts price to 450 rupees from 700 while retaining an underperform rating. And it's a clash of the titans in the world's wealthiest list. Ambani and Adani battle for top Indian honors. Adani is the biggest wealth gainer in the list. Benchmark indices wrapped up the week with healthy gains, not letting the Fed rate hike spoil the mood. Holi celebrations commenced on Dalal Street. Sensex and Nifty surged nearly 2% today amid gains across most sectors. Sensex surged over 1,000 points today to end above 57,800. Nifty claiming 17,000 again after surging over 300 points. Nifty gained 4% to post the best week in more than a year. 45 out of 50 Nifty stocks gained this week. But the mid-cap and small-cap indices underperformed. Nifty Bank, meanwhile, up 5% for the week to record its biggest weekly gains in 2 months. Except PSUs, all sectoral indices recorded gains, and after days of volatility, there was some respite for investors today as they got richer by 4 lakh crores. HDFC was the top index gainer, rallying 5.6%. JSW Steel, Titan, SBI Life, Reliance, some of the other notable gainers, up between 3 and 5%. Around 5 years after it last raised interest rates, the world's largest and most powerful central bank has decided to raise rates again. The US Fed Reserve has hiked key benchmark interest rate for the first time after 2018 on account of the unprecedented rise in domestic inflation in the US. Indian markets rose on the news as the hike is smaller than expected.
The US central bank started its biggest ever campaign against burgeoning inflation by not only raising interest rates, but also signaling at least 6 more hikes this year. The 0.25 percentage hike announced by the US Fed is the first since 2018 and reverses the stance the powerful bank held to battle the coronavirus pandemic. For the US, it was a trade-off between reining in a galloping inflation and the threat of an economy slowing down due to the aftershocks of the Ukraine war. Ultimately, price rise emerged as the bigger threat, forcing the US Federal Reserve to tighten its monetary policy with a 0.25 percentage point increase in interest rates. The US Central Bank also left the field open to 6 more hikes this year.
At the Federal Reserve, we are strongly committed to achieving the monetary policy goals that Congress has given us: maximum employment and price stability. Today, in support of these goals, the FOMC raised its policy interest rate by 1/4 percentage point. The economy is very strong, and against the backdrop of an extremely tight labor market and high inflation, the committee anticipates that ongoing increases in the target range for the federal funds rate will be appropriate.
The monthly rate of inflation in the US hit a 40-year high of 7.9% in February, nearly 0.5% more than a month ago. The numbers nearly tripled since March 2021. US Fed is ready to deploy other fiscal weapons against inflation as well. This includes stopping bond purchases, which led to increasing money supply in the market. US currently holds nearly $9 trillion in bonds purchased during the lockdown-induced slowdown. However, inflation is expected to stay above the Fed's comfort level of 2% for the next 2 years. The rate hikes have been welcomed by global markets, which were wary of a higher increase.
There was some talk, certainly a few weeks ago, that it might even be 0.5 percentage point to make a stronger message against inflation. But with everything going on between Russia and Ukraine, it was clear that 25 basis points was the most likely outcome today.
Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine is expected to hit the US economy, with the Fed reducing the 2022 growth rate estimate to 2.8% from the 4% projected in December, weighed down by increase in prices of fuel and commodities. Bureau Report, Business Today TV.
So what's the impact of the Fed rate hike on India and the Indian equity markets? Some sections are expecting a rate hike by the RBI, while others feel that inflation is not as much a threat in emerging markets like India as it is in the developed world. The war in Ukraine has put the focus on crude oil and other commodity prices. If they sustain under $100 a barrel, the RBI may avoid hiking rates and focus on supporting growth. What about stock markets? What does the Fed rate hike mean for the Lal Street? The 0.25 point increase is a relief for those fearing a 0.5 percentage point rise. FPIs who've sold equities worth 1,51,741 crore rupees in cash since last October may return, giving domestic institutional investors who bought shares worth 1,67,269 crores in the same period a chance to book profits. Indranil Pan joining us now to decode what the macroeconomic environment is looking like. Indranil, thanks so much for joining us. What do you feel is going to be the game plan when it comes to the RBI? Is inflation as much of a risk here in India? Following suit after we've seen central banks around the world address inflation concerns, what do you feel the RBI is likely to do here?
For that, I think the headline CPI, which is mainly the gauge that the RBI looks at, let's break it up into three parts. One is the food, which is about 47% of the overall inflation. There is the second part is more the fuel related, the petrol and the diesel prices and how it impacts the transportation cost. And the third is the stuff like the items that we consume, including the services in terms of healthcare, education, etc. The food is not a problem for India, simply even as the wheat prices globally are on the firmer side. Simply because we are well stocked in terms of food. Our Kharif as well as Rabi for the last season have been good. And even though we don't have any met projections at this point in time, we go with the assumption that there is no disruption in terms of food production in India. Indeed, India's stocks are so surplus that India can actually sort of move to exporting wheat to cool down the global wheat prices. So that's not a big worry for India. The worry is the fuel prices, and the commodity prices, which is more a problem in terms of the wholesale price index rather than the consumer price index. Given the weak demand conditions, we don't think that there will be a one-on-one pass-through from the WPI to the CPI. But having said that, compared to the last inflation target that the RBI had provided for FY23, which is 4.5%, they might be forced to move it higher by about 50 to 70 basis points, which will be the new forecast that will come out in April. But even then, we are comfortably within the 6% mark. So I don't see an immediate reason for the RBI to move rates. Indeed, the negative implications of the higher commodity prices and the fuel prices, especially in terms of its implication for the private consumption expenditure, could be larger than the implications of a relatively higher inflation immediately. And that's the reason why the RBI should be holding back on any monetary policy action on the higher side immediately.
Okay. In the last policy, of course, they continued to be fairly accommodative. Indranil, do you feel that attempt to remain dovish in order to support growth is going to go a long way? Do you see the economy bouncing back?
I think that's a difficult question to answer. And in terms of how the fuel prices is absorbed by the economy becomes relevant. For instance, the government has yet not hiked the fuel prices, and a large portion of the fuel price increases that should have otherwise been passed on to the consumers is being absorbed within the fiscal. Going forward, we need to watch out the overall crude oil prices. It has indeed come down from its peak of about 138, 139, the Brent crude, back to around 100 whereabouts. There are some indications that the talks between Russia and Ukraine might actually yield some results. And the oil inventories in the US suddenly once again have gone up. So all those factors are feeding into the global fuel prices, the crude oil prices. And to that extent, the fiscal implication of that, whether the government is willing to give a excise duty cut or is absorbing in the fiscal in terms of a higher fuel subsidy, all those become relevant in terms of how much it is passed on to the end user consumer, and therefore the negative implications of that on growth. But having said that, I think in terms of the overall production process, and if logistics costs were to go higher, there could be a hit to the real economy to the extent of about 30 to 50 basis points.
All right, Indranil, thanks so much for joining us. Great speaking with you and getting a sense of how things stand currently.
There could be more heartburn for those still invested in Paytm. The stock has been further downgraded by Macquarie, which first raised concerns about its IPO valuations. Watch this report to see what Macquarie thinks the right price is.
While demonetization turned Paytm into a savior, the shocking fate of India's largest ever IPO has investors begging for mercy. Paytm has been on a slide since its debut on the bourses, losing around 72% of its market cap. To add to Paytm's woes, Macquarie, one of the first to warn investors about Paytm's valuation, has slashed its target for the stock by a further 35% to 450 rupees. The first target Macquarie issued was 1200 rupees when the IPO issue price of 2150 rupees was announced. 2 months later, it was slashed to 900 and to 700 rupees last month. Paytm ended the week at 6.28% down, even as the Sensex rose over 1,000 points. The global financial major cited regulatory headwinds, including a falling probability of getting a banking license for the cut in target price. The brokerage firm's valuation is premised on the valuation of global fintech firms, which have corrected sharply. Macquarie believes that Paytm will face more headwinds because of the Reserve Bank of India's regulations on digital payments, buy now, pay later, and stricter Know Your Customer or KYC norms. Earlier this week, the RBI had barred Paytm Payments Bank from onboarding new customers. The central bank has issues with Paytm's protocols relating to KYC, data privacy, data storage. The RBI has also directed the company to conduct a comprehensive system audit of its IT systems. If you think, as an investor, you're bearing the brunt of the 72% slump in the Paytm stock, think twice. Not only is Paytm founder Vijay Shekhar Sharma no longer a billionaire, but Warren Buffett's maiden investment in India has gone all wrong. A highly promising fintech has turned into a loss-making bet for many. Bureau Report, Business Today Television.
Several global factors have impacted IPO plans of Indian startups and companies. The ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, tightening of monetary policy by the US Fed Reserve, looming threat of another COVID wave, and share market volatility have all contributed to the delay of scheduled IPOs. Post the delay in the LIC IPO, several other companies which were waiting for that to get out of the way are reportedly delaying their own plans. Here are some of the companies that we're talking about. Indian payment service provider MobiKwik will not be heading for IPO in the next few months. Go First, the Nusli Wadia Group, had temporarily put on hold its 3,600 crore rupee IPO plan amid the raging Omicron wave and travel restrictions. Delivery, the logistics company, has pushed its approximately $1 billion IPO to the next fiscal year starting in April. Oyo is yet to get a green signal from market regulator SEBI for its planned IPO of $1.2 billion. The race for Reliance Shipyard has been won by a consortium led by Nikhil Merchant. The news of the bid had first been broken by Business Today TV. Nearly 95% of the lenders reportedly voted in favor of the consortium's resolution plan. The voting ended late evening today. The consortium of two companies, Hazel Mercantile and Swan Energy, had bid around 2,700 crore rupees for the bankrupt shipyard, previously owned by a company chaired by Anil Ambani. Ambani had, in fact, made a last-minute offer to wrest back control of the shipyard, which has been rejected by lenders. The Russia-Ukraine war is spelling trouble for India. Rising inflation due to the war has led to Moody's lowering its forecast for India's GDP growth to 9.1% from 9.5%. The credit ratings major has also cut GDP forecast for 2023 to 5.4%. According to Moody's, high fuel and fertilizer costs will weigh on government finances, potentially limiting its planned capital spending. JP Morgan too downgraded India to underweight from neutral, saying its GDP growth may disappoint. According to the brokerage firm, high inflation is hurting both households and businesses. Let's take a very quick break. Back with more on the other side.
Rahul Kanwal, 23 years of experience, 5 conflicts covered, unmatched time in war zone.
the first embedded operation in the history of Indian television journalism.
Gaurav Sawant, 28 years of reporting, 8 conflicts covered, unmatched hours in conflict areas.
Actual firing is taking place, the grads are firing.
Shivarur, 19 years of reporting, 5 conflicts covered, unmatched view of international crossfires.
And the attack guns are firing away.
Geeta Mohan, 18 years of reporting, 3 conflicts covered. When the world is at war, there is no compromise on India today.
Russia has made an offer which India just can't refuse. They've offered crude oil to India at discounted rates, which will help reduce fuel prices in India. But news of this deal reached the White House as well.
India could take up the Russian offer of discounted crude oil. What would be your message to India or any other country?
Our message to any country continues to be that obviously abide by the sanctions, but that we have put in place and recommended. I don't believe this would be violating that.
While the US agreed that India will not be flouting any of its sanctions by entering into a deal with Russia, but Jen Psaki's next statement made it clear how India's dealings with Russia will be viewed by the US.
Also think about where you want to stand when the history books are written in this moment in time. And support for the Russian leadership is support for an invasion that obviously is having a devastating impact.
US President Joe Biden announced a complete ban on Russian oil imports by the US on the 8th of March.
Today, I'm announcing the United States is targeting the main artery of Russia's economy. We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy.
Ever since the US made this announcement, there was a widespread fear in India that fuel prices would increase considerably. Due to fear of a fuel price hike amid the Ukraine-Russia crisis and the mustard harvest season, there was a huge rush of farmers stocking up diesel and petrol outside fuel pumps in Haryana.
जो रूस और यूक्रेन का युद्ध चल रहा है संभावित
Welcome back. Stock markets seem to be getting into a festive mood ahead of Holi, with a broad-based green rally being witnessed despite pressures. Watch Sakshi Batra speak to Siddharth Sadani, Head Equity Products and Advisory Anand Rathi, to find out his key Holi stock picks, with which one could create a colourful and vibrant portfolio.
So if I had to ask you, for all our viewers who are willing to make an investment portfolio as of today, when the markets are recovering from the recent losses that we have seen and the bulls are trying to make a comeback yet again, what would be your 3 top Holi picks, Holi 2022 picks, along with target prices and the duration that you would recommend them for, so that our investors can definitely add them to their portfolio and enjoy the benefits of Holi?
Certainly, Sakshi. If I name I would like to pick up first stock would be a private bank. And amongst the private banking space, I would like to pick up Axis Bank with a target of 860. Axis looks quite interesting. Looking at the results, profitability was more than 2 times, 200% up. Loan growth was around 17%. Asset quality has been improving quarter on quarter. Margins at 3.39%. So it's a strong asset quality mix. I think Axis Bank is out of the woods and we may see a great performance. 860 is what the target is. The next company which I would like to pick it up from here on would be Dixon Technology. Atmanirbhar stock, I believe. Dixon Technology looks very interesting to me. Contract manufacturer. Global aspirations have been rising with Dixon. They would like to be a global LED manufacturer. Added to that, the joint venture with Bharti will bring in a lot of colors and revenue for them. 1400 to 1600 odd crores revenue is expected. Refrigerators is one segment they've entered, and 12% of the refrigerators manufactured by Dixon. Mobile manufacturing would be a very big chunk for them. Off late, they did a contract with Acer for 5 lakh laptops. So contract manufacturer Atmanirbhar company, Dixon Technology, with a target of 5,900 is what our second stock. And the third company, again from a consumption arena, and heat is all around on the streets and summers are coming up. I would like to beat the heat. I would like to pick up Havells. Havells looks very interesting to me with a target of 1362 because all the segments are very good. They are market leaders. Balance sheet is good. Return ratios are fabulous, 20% and above. Strong retail distribution network. Havells with a target of 1362.
A clash of the titans in the world's wealthiest list. Mukesh Ambani and Gautam Adani battle for top Indian honours. Adani is the biggest wealth gainer in the list. Take a look on our special report.
Hurun Global Rich List 2022 is out, and Reliance Industries chairman Mukesh Ambani took home the richest man in India and Asia title with a whopping 24% jump in his wealth. Ambani became the only Indian to feature in the top 10 global rich list with a net worth of $103 billion. Close on his heels is the Adani Group chairman Gautam Adani, who was competing with Ambani for the richest man title earlier this year. Adani added $49 billion to his wealth last year, more than the net addition of wealth by the top 3 global billionaires Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos and Bernard Adani was named the richest energy entrepreneur. From dropping out of college and trying out his luck in various failed ventures to establishing an empire spanning ports, airports, mines, green energy and more, Gautam Adani has come a long way. According to Hurun's list, Gautam Adani's wealth registered a 153% year-on-year change, while Asia's richest man, Mukesh Ambani's wealth, only increased by 24% in 2021. But Ambani and Adani have one thing in common. Both have built business based on fossil fuel. Reliance runs the world's biggest refining complex at Jamnagar in Gujarat, while Adani is India's largest private sector operator of coal-fired thermal stations and the country's largest coal trader. The Hurun Global Rich List includes 7 Indians in the top 100. Cyrus Poonawalla tops the list of Indians after Ambani and Adani. He is followed closely by Lakshmi Mittal, ace investor Radhakishan Damani and SP Hinduja and family. Other notable addition in the rich list is Falguni Nair, founder of Nykaa, who made it to the list of the wealthiest with assets $7.6 billion. Bureau Report, Business Today TV.
Now let's listen in to Uday Kotak, MD and CEO at Kotak Mahindra Bank, talking about state of the economy and women empowerment.
How many women work for the bank that you founded and have led so successfully into a marquee name?
We have got a total workforce which is now more than 80,000 people in totality. And our current ratio is 26%. And we aspire to take it to a third in the next 3 years.
Wow, a round of applause for that. And how does that compare with peers in the banking space?
I think a lot of them are in the early 20s. Some of them are in the late teens. But I think we are pretty much at a reasonable ratio, but there is clearly room to improve. And again, there, Siddharth, it's about stereotypes. The belief is that there are certain kinds of jobs in a bank which a woman can't do.
This was the PSU bank stereotype.
PSU banks and even in private sector banks. And let me give you one example.
Keep the mic closer.
Let me give you one example. The example of collections. So one of the very important aspects which a bank has to do is to collect the money it has lent. So the stereotype is, for a collections job, it has to be a male. So we have actually now found that women not only are effective in the job, in fact, they are better. And we have also tried it in rural and semi-urban India. And it is turning out to be very effective. For doing a job which was a male stereotype job of collections.
So collection is not about muscle, it's all about mind and presence.
Absolutely.
Okay, what about borrowing? Because I remember talking to bankers and also on the field, especially in the small finance sector, and a lot of them say women make good borrowers. They return the money on time. Is that correct?
I think there are a number of other areas where women actually score better. One is commitment to repay a loan.
Okay.
And that is clearly superior. Second is stickiness in the job. The attrition ratio of women is much lower than men, at least at Kotak.
Okay.
And it's something which we find quite fascinating. And as long as we can find innovative ways of women growing, for example, flexibility on work hours. And one of the things which COVID has dramatically made it possible is flexibility on work hours. And if we expand that scope and make it even flexi times, at 2 or 3 times a week to come to work and balance work from home, I think it's going to dramatically increase the participation of women in the workforce.
When it comes to making India Atmanirbhar, one of the torchbearers is Dixon Technologies. Dixon is the biggest manufacturer of LED TVs in India, producing for the likes of Samsung and Panasonic. Udayan Mukherjee was in conversation with Sunil Vachani of Dixon Technologies. Here's an excerpt.
Do you think we have the capability of creating a successful, viable semiconductor system in India where we are not overly reliant on imports?
Let's not forget, we also have one of the lowest corporate tax rates for manufacturing companies. So combine that with the incentive of PLI, combine that with the new semiconductor policy, also combine that with the state government incentives, and you would see that we have one of the most attractive packages as compared to any country in the world.
Watch the full interview tomorrow at 10:30 p.m. on India Today and our website plus YouTube. And that's all from us on the show today. Thanks so much for watching. Wishing you all a very happy Holi.
As Russia declared war on Ukraine, as the world was plunged again into crisis, with the only Indian team in the real war zone.
This is Mariupol. You hear a series. Hear this sound.
I will show you a quick, so to say, bombshell room tour.
I can smell the gunpowder in the air.
And without pause, India Today totally dominates viewership and smashes the competition. When it's the world's biggest news story, there's only one gold standard of journalism. When it's the world's biggest news story, there's only one gold standard of journalism.
You are watching India Today. You are watching
Presented by RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, Growing Legacies. Co-presented by Century Ply, Aag Se Bachai. Co-presented by Macho Hint, Fashion Bade Aaram Se. Co-presented by Sensodyne. Co-presented by The New Age Baleno, Tech Goes Bold. Co-powered by Apollo 24/7. Download now. From the break of war.
This is Mariupol. You hear a series. Hear this sound.
Through the debris and devastation.
You can hear more blasts that are taking place. We are moving away from this area. We are being told to leave this area because it's not safe to be here. You can hear some blasts that are taking place.
Please close the sky.
Close the sky. That's the message.
Over the roar of war machines.
Very, very careful, Pawan, very careful. These are anti-tank mines that are laid on the road here.
Continuous fighting taking place.
No compromise, no half measures.
उन्होंने हमारे ऊपर हथियार तान के रखा है.
This is one of the frontline areas where trenches have been dug up, bunkers have been set. They're all prepared, all set to take on the Russian forces.
Now they are back.
Hello, sir.
The world watched the Ukraine war only on India Today.
Over the past 1 month, millions of people across the country have been watching every single minute of India Today's war dispatches from Ukraine. And so, joining me on the news track, back from the battlefield, our war heroes, I want to welcome Gaurav Sawant. Gaurav, welcome. Great to have you back. And we're so relieved that you're back, as is Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor, video journalist Pawan, who was with Gaurav, Mohsin, who went with Shweta Singh and with Geeta, and they're back after spending the last several weeks in the battlefield. And as I said, a very young, very special guest, Vidushi, Gaurav's daughter, who's just very happy to be right next to her papa. Gaurav, to you first. First, everyone in the newsroom, mighty delighted and relieved that you're back. What's it like coming back after a month in the battlefield? I hope you're not missing the battlefield.
So I actually wanted to be there longer. You and I had that conversation, but it's good to be back. It's actually great to be back. Great to be back to office, to Vidushi, to Aditi, to my parents, family here at work. It's great to be back, but it would have been great to be at the battlefield till the end.
Oh, sure. But none of this takes away from our commitment to covering this war. This is just to give all our viewers a sense of what the coverage was like. Geeta, you literally insisted, demanded that you be sent out to cover this war, and finally you were. And you did a fantastic job out and about covering the war. Describe some of your experiences.
Well, the biggest challenge, as we were speaking earlier also, Rahul, was to get your logistics right. You need, if you're in a conflict zone, if you're reporting alone, you need to get your logistics right. And in that, there were no interpreters. Drivers had fled home. So I had to drive my own vehicle, had to get my sources right, because if you're in the wrong hands, you'll land up in the wrong place. So I had to get my sources right, build confidence. So those were the bigger challenges. Once I had that in place, stories that were to be told, that should have been told, were told.
Shweta, one of your passions is to cover the army, and you spend a lot of time with men in uniform, but it's one thing to see them practice and the other to be in the middle of a real war.
And I'll tell you, they were more jealous
They used to, all my friends in the army used to send me messages every single day asking me what's the update and how is it like. So I completely agree with Gaurav that I would have loved to be there sooner because Geeta and I were trying to get there the second visa because Gaurav flew at a time when there was no war, and we knew we had to walk at a time when there was a war, and there were air raid sirens going all over when you had no car, no shelter, just a rucksack, a backpack, and you're just walking into war zone. So I hope we did well. I think the company was, the group was very confident that we could do it. It's amazing to have such an opportunity to go to a land you don't speak the language in, to go to a place where there's a war going, to go to a place with, actually, you couldn't even carry your bulletproofs with you and there was no bulletproof there.
And so many people have messaged or mailed or tweeted out to say that they were actually watching India Today's coverage rather than watching a CNN or BBC, despite this being an international story. And that just speaks volumes for the kind of effort that our team did. Pawan, this was your first war experience. So you haven't covered any particular hostile situation much more than, say, a riot, and here you were in the middle of a real war. How was it?
अच्छा एक्सपीरियंस रहा। वहाँ जाके आपको शूट भी करना है और आपको लोगों को भी देखना है और वहाँ की जो पुलिस है, मिलिट्री है, उनको भी कन्विंस करना है कि एक तो वहाँ पे लैंग्वेज का बड़ा प्रॉब्लम होता था, तो हम लोगों को उनको कन्विंस करना होता था कि वी आर फ्रॉम इंडिया, वी आर जर्नलिस्ट। लेकिन ये सब को देखते हुए आपको खुद का भी ध्यान रखना है, अपने को टीम का भी ध्यान रखना है कि आपको कैसे काम करना है। बॉम्बिंग हो रही है, शेलिंग हो रही है, सब तरफ का ध्यान रखते हुए आपको करना है। डर भी लग रहा था बीच बीच में, कई बार बहुत जगह पे डर लगा भी। गन पॉइंट पे उन्होंने हम लोगों को सर्च भी किया, टाइम भी लगा।
I was telling you that Pawan once had an instance where he had somebody cock a gun at his forehead. So a Kalashnikov on your forehead, that can't be कनपट्टी पे बंदूक रखी उन्होंने?
Absolutely, बहुत बार, जितनी बार इस टूर में मेरा पहला एक्सपीरियंस था, जितनी बार मैं इस टूर पे इस एक्सपीरियंस मैंने लिया है घुटनों में बैठने का, मैंने किसी और जगह पे नहीं लिया है। कि हर जगह पे मतलब वहाँ पे एक्चुअली क्या होता था कि मैं कैमरे पे रहता था, तो उनको लगता था कि हम लोग कुछ शूट करके कोई ट्रांसमिट ना कर दे, कुछ चेक पोस्ट ना दिखा दे, तो उनको वो लोग वहाँ पे हम लोगों को देखते थे, हमारा कैमरा देखते थे, विजुअल्स क्या लिए हैं आप लोगों ने, वो सब चीज़ों को वो लोग देखते थे। जब उनको एक बार कन्विंस हो जाता था कि ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, तब जाके वो हम लोगों को छोड़ते थे।
Good, so you now have enough stories to tell your grandchildren and then spend all the time talking about what you've been doing on the battlefield.
अभी तक तो कुछ नहीं बताया, लेकिन अब शायद बताना पड़ेगा कि क्या क्या हुआ।
grandchildren तो हो जाए।
नहीं, in years to come, सबको बता सकती कहानी है।
अभी नहीं बताया।
Mohsin is one of our most talented video journalists, and he's been to different kinds of situations, covering different stories. And how was it, Mohsin, being in the middle of a battlefield where you had air sirens going off every hour?
हम लोग एयरप्लेन में शूट कर रहे थे, तो जब श्वेता सामने है तो मैं इधर खड़ा हूँ, मेरे पीछे से फायरिंग हो रही है, तो मुझे इनको इशारे करना है कि थोड़ा सा इस तरफ से करते हैं। उसके बाद पीछे की तरफ एम्बुलेंसेज आ रही हैं जिसमें रेस्क्यू करके ला रहे हैं। अब हम 360 घूम रहे हैं। अब जब ये इधर आ गई हैं तो मेरे पीछे फायरिंग है, तो अब ये मुझे इशारा कर रही हैं कि थोड़ा सा इधर से शूट कर।
ये सब लाइव हो रहा है?
ये सब लाइव चल रहा था। हमने 2 घंटा लाइव किया था जब वो एयरप्लेन में शेलिंग हो रही थी और ब्रिज गिरा था। और फिर दूसरी चीज़ ये होती थी कि हम एक जगह गए जहाँ ट्रेनिंग चल रही थी, सिविलियंस की, आर्मी ट्रेन कर रही थी।
देखी थी मैंने आपकी स्टोरी।
तो उसमें शूट करना है हमें, लेकिन वो बोलते हैं कि आपको लोकेशन नहीं दिखानी। उनके बैंड शूट करने हैं, बैंड चेंज हुए थे आर्मी के, येलो टू ब्लू, वो शूट करने हैं, लोकेशन दिखानी नहीं है। आपका एंकर भी खड़ा है, आपको इतना भी फ्रेम रखना है कि एंकर भी दिख जाए, वो भी दिख जाए, लोकेशन भी ना दिखे। फिर उनको फुटेज चेक करानी है। अब क्लिप मल्टीपल करनी पड़ती थी, सिंगल क्लिप है तो उसने बोला डिलीट करो, तो आपकी पूरी फुटेज गई। फिर फुटेज जाने के बाद सारा कार्ड फॉर्मेट करना है।
वो जिद करते थे क्या फॉर्मेट?
नहीं, वो जिद नहीं करते। हम आज आपने मुझे शूट करा लिया, आज कर लिया, कल को इनका शूट है, ये बोलेंगे कल ये कहाँ किया था, इसे तो पता ही नहीं कि मैं कौन हूँ। तो आपका किया, भेजा, ख़त्म, नेक्स्ट ब्लैंक कार्ड पे शूट होगा।
Gaurav, give everyone who's watching a sense of the situation on the battlefield, because we're seeing a lot of Ukrainian information warfare. We're seeing psyops from Russia. What really is happening on the ground? Is Russia genuinely making ingress? Are the Ukrainians actually being able to push back?
They are able to push back, but how long, Rahul? That remains a challenge. But when you look at the bigger picture, and we were privileged. I mean, we managed to get to Kharkiv. We went to Mariupol. We were reporting from Irpin and Bucha and Brovary. Now, since we were driving,
I don't think anybody else went out. Gaurav actually thought this is a good opportunity to see a beautiful country. So from Mariupol, which later got attacked, to coming back all the way to Kiev and then finally to Lviv. So you actually had a good Ukraine darshan.
Absolutely, and driving myself. That was the biggest advantage. If you can drive in Europe, you can do anything. That was one big advantage that we have. At times we relied on the Google map. Like when we were running out of Mariupol, we were shot at. Because, we filmed something, the Ukrainian army, or was it a militia, we do not know. Perhaps they didn't like it. And there we are...
You got fired at, right? I think that's when everyone got really scared.
Yeah.
In your vehicle. Who was firing at you and why?
So, it was either the Ukrainian army or the militia, or maybe the Russians had come into that area. We saw a checkpoint. We dodged it. Rajesh was in the car with us, and Rajesh was filming on his mobile phone. And suddenly, in my rear side view mirror, and then you hear it. You see a gun cocked and tack, 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 5 rounds, one after the other. So instinctively, I just went zigzag, zigzag so that you dodge those bullets. And we were driving a beautiful SUV. So here was a lady who wanted to get out of Mariupol. Mariupol was being shelled. Her driver didn't show up. She met somebody at her hotel. We met another Indian contact, and that Indian contact said, will you drive her car? And we said, sure. I didn't even know what car. It's a left-hand drive car. And we had absolutely no idea. We just said, yes, we will. And we just dumped all our stuff. That lady dumped all her stuff. And we zipped past. And the roads were shut. They had trees on the road. So we went in the kacha. And then came out. And then they started firing at us. We dodged that. And then we drove non-stop 350 kilometers, anchoring 2 bulletins while we were driving. Because they were firing. And we didn't know whether we'd be able to get to that place. But we wanted to get the latest back. But we got to Dnipro safe. Dnipro is now under attack.
This is where a Fauji upbringing comes very handy.
Yes.
You're used to driving in the kacha and having convoys fired at. Geeta, give us a sense of the diplomatic state of play, because from what we can gather in the headlines, you've got Ukraine and Russia apparently close to some kind of a rapprochement. Is that for real?
So the Ukrainians say that there is no concept or idea of a neutral state as of now, because that would mean absolute political suicide for Zelensky. So Zelensky is in a very tough position right now, with the Russians closing in on Kiev and the Russians wanting a regime change. Will he step down, or will he go in for a compromise? Because the NATO is not coming, European Union is not going to help them, and there's going to be no military intervention. So Ukrainians are left to defend themselves. And in that, they now need to decide whether if it is worth continuing this war or negotiating. So they are negotiating, but Putin is very clear. You negotiate, but there will be no ceasefire. ICJ ruling may be one of the reasons why...
But how can you negotiate when there's war going on?
It has been. They've been negotiating. The chief negotiator level talks were taking place when they attacked Kyiv. The foreign minister level talks were taking place when they destroyed Kharkiv and Mariupol. Then they are now looking at a president level talk. Let's see if that will come through. There is a second round of foreign minister level talks that may have some forward movement on...
This is all talk about military and diplomacy. Vidushi, what in the world was going through your head when your father was live, his car being fired at, or he's up and you're not being able to get through to him?
I think I mainly just missed him, and I wasn't too concerned because he'd done this sort of stuff before, but I just missed him, and that's all. I wasn't that worried.
You weren't worried? No. Oh, come on, you're just saying that.
Not that much.
Really?
Yeah.
Gaurav, it's good to be back home with family. Your wife, parents, daughter. I mean, she's also a Fauji grandchild, right? So she's just being brave. I promise you, anybody who says that they weren't scared, I doubt that would be true. Being anxious is really very, very natural. Okay, no, we don't want to get either of them to cry. That's not the idea at all. Shweta, you had...
My parents were so confident that we didn't even speak for a single day. Mohsin knows that. I didn't speak at home for a single day. They were sure I'll come back. It was super. Okay, so not an officer, but I'm a JCO's grandchild. He single-handedly brought me up, and I always wanted to join the army. The army doesn't have combat for women. Sad.
How is it in Ukraine? Because we saw a lot of those MPs actually pick up guns.
Not just MPs, Gaurav. You've got, as Rahul, I always swap their names. So these women who were standing at pickets with false eyelashes, painted nails, and with an AK-47, and strong women. The other one who we interviewed, Geeta, her name was Aditi, incidentally, the Indian name. She had a Hindu name and a
nice.
Ukrainian name, Elena. So she was in the army and trained to fire an AK-47 at 19, age 19. And she's an instructor now for the militia. She's an instructor for the territorial army, sorry.
Yes.
So the women there are lovely. They are into combat. And what I loved about Ukraine, because when you stay at a particular place, you tend to get an affinity with those people. You can be neutral as a journalist, but when you look at those people and their motivation, knowing fully well that you've got a huge army in front of you, Russia who's a superpower, and yet you're willing to fight, you're just taking a 3-day training and you're going there and you're saying that the Russians will have to be pushed back. I love that spirit, that they want to fight.
And this is amazing, Geeta, because what you have here are civilians coming together and saying we will fight, guns being distributed, and civilians who otherwise say are MPs or doctors, engineers, some were even cyber warriors from one of your stories picking up guns.
Absolutely. So the determination that we saw of the civilians coming together, and there's age no bar. So we interviewed an 18-year-old kid and a senior citizen. When we were in Brovary where attacks were taking place and we were in the trenches, there was a senior citizen.
Chernobyl guy.
Yes. Yeah. There was a senior citizen there. So there's no bar to age, but again, Rahul, there's a flip side to it. Now, the very same people who have now been distributed AK-47s, if things settle down, you don't know who has guns, who is a part of a militia, a group or mafia, and if things go wrong, it could go very wrong in a civilian strife within the country. That's one major concern quite a few senior officials have in Ukraine.
Pawan, what was the most scary part of being out in Ukraine? सबसे ज़्यादा डर आपको कब लगा और क्यों?
सबसे ज़्यादा डर तब लगा जब हम लोग डिफेंस मिनिस्ट्री के पास से गुजर रहे थे. वहाँ पर मिलिट्री जो लोकल यूक्रेन की मिलिट्री थी, वो लोग हम लोग को दूर से उन्होंने बोल दिया था कि आप लोग वहीं रुक जाइए अपनी यूक्रेन लैंग्वेज. बट लकीली हमारे पास एक वहाँ पे उस टाइम पे एक इंटरप्रेटर साथ में थे, कॉल्ड एलेक्स नाम था उनका. उन्होंने उनसे बात करी और उन्होंने हमें बोला कि आप वहीं पे घुटने में बैठ जाइए, और उन्होंने जो है अपना गन को कॉक करके और हमारे पास आने लगा था. स्कैरी पार्ट तब था जब तक उन्होंने हमारे पे गन था नहीं, तब तक तो कुछ नहीं था. जब मैंने अपने लेफ्ट साइड पे देखा तो एक बॉडी पड़ी हुई थी वहाँ पर, तो मुझे उस टाइम पे बहुत डर लग गया था कि शायद हम लोगों को भी शायद वो गोली वोली ना चला दें, क्योंकि उनके लिए तो कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. वो तो सोचेंगे, वो ये सोच रहे हैं कि हम लोग जो है क्या शूट कर रहे हैं, क्या दिखाने जा रहे हैं, तो उनको कन्विंस करना बहुत प्रॉब्लम था. तो उसकी वजह से हम लोग को वहाँ पे मेरे को बहुत डर लगा. तो वो सबसे स्कैरी पार्ट हमारा वहाँ पे.
Mohsin, Ukraine is a beautiful country, but now ravaged by war. And how difficult is it to shoot these pictures of death, devastation, destruction?
हमने चलना शुरू किया इरपिन की तरफ, तो उधर शेलिंग हो रही थी. अब शेलिंग में हमें नहीं पता कि किस तरफ से हो रही है. लैंग्वेज उन्हें हमारी नहीं आती, हमें उनकी नहीं आती. तो एक से श्वेता ने कुछ पूछा, तो उसको भी कुछ नहीं समझ आ रहा था. तो वो बोला धूम, मतलब कि अगर एक आया तो उधर से आया, 3 आ रहे हैं तो वो आवाज़ गूंज रही थी हमारी तरफ से. तो उधर 3 हो रहे थे. तो फिर जो हमें थोड़ा सा था, फिर हम आराम से चलने लगे कि नहीं ये इस तरफ से हो रहे हैं, तो आगे बढ़ते रहो. तो फिर आगे पहुँचे तो ब्रिज टूटा हुआ था. हम गोरों की पिक्चर देखते थे कि यार फिरंगी शूट करते हैं, हमने पहली बार ऐसा देखा है कुछ. फिर हमने भी शूट किया.
And there was a time when you were stuck in a train at night, because that train was supposed to leave for Kiev, and for 14 hours with no air conditioning, you were stuck in the train.
So this was in Mariupol. Before we took this vehicle out, we had a ticket and we were supposed to take a train out, but they shelled the railway line or somewhere very close to the railway line, so the trains couldn't move. We were already sitting inside the train, so the engine driver and the conductor, they switched off all lights. Railway station, all lights switched off. Train, all lights switched off, and thousands of people locked inside a train. You can't get out, you can't do anything. And 13 hours we were inside that train, and there was shelling that was happening around in Mariupol, very close to the railway station, and ultimately that area was targeted. But we just sat there. Now the moment instinctively as a journalist you start recording, people around said your lights, they'll start shelling, and then you just had to sit there. So then you did the next best thing, you went off to sleep. So you had a good night's sleep.
Were you watching television? Were you plugged in, or were you in your own zone?
I was watching.
You were watching all the time?
Yeah.
Were you scared?
Nah.
Good girl.
That's amazing. this is a very, I don't know how people reflect on this, but this is a very Fauji thing, that you've got a member of your family out in the battlefield, and of course you're anxious and you're concerned, but you're not scared, and that is just truly testament to the spirit of being a Fauji bacha. Gaurav, just by association, she's born in a Fauji family, so she is in that sense a Fauji bacha, and living up to being a Fauji bacha.
Absolutely. But you know what was very interesting, Rahul? Something that we take away from this battle, that 1 month plus that we were there, is the spirit of the people of Ukraine to fight against all odds. They're getting the weapons, they're learning to fight. They may not agree with President Zelensky, but they're still fighting. A large number of...
Is Zelensky popular?
He was at one point of time very popular. And those who love him, the nationalists, they worship him. Including some who say that even though there are neo-Nazis or the Azov battalion, that they're there. So those elements are gung-ho about war. But there are those who are not gung-ho about war, but they too are standing up because they don't want somebody else to make the rules for them.
How did people in Ukraine respond to Zelensky? Because just before the war, he'd become a bit of an unpopular person because he seemed to be in denial and delusion. But he seems to have really rallied to the moment.
That's a very important question, Rahul, because this whole rallying behind the president started happening when Putin moved beyond Donbass. Till the time he confined himself to Donbass, which is a pro-Russia, Russian origin people kind of a area, it was okay. But till when he moved to Kharkiv, Mariupol and Kyiv, that's when the nationalism, of all the people started, they were more nationalistic than anyone else. And the support for President Zelensky was not just from the people, from opposition parties. Now, there is no opposition in Ukraine because everybody is rallying behind Zelensky. So his popularity has grown because of the war, but is it sustainable? Because a lot of people now are questioning, what were your assurances? And if you did not have assurances, why were you talking about joining NATO and European Union without having those assurances and taken an entire country to war? So these are only a few people who are asking these questions. Putin having invaded Ukraine is a huge mistake, because if Putin wanted Ukrainians to like him and wanted a regime change, that certainly is not happening with an invasion.
We had a lot of people, Shweta, asking us about where are they staying, what are they eating, how are they traveling, how safe are they? Give us a sense of what life was like in Ukraine.
Pretty okay, pretty, I wouldn't say completely comfortable.
अच्छे से बताइए.
So we had an Indian family to fall back on. At least we were assured of hot breakfast, soup and
you want to say
bread.
big thank you to Kuldeep ji and his family. So thank you so much if you're watching in Ukraine at this time.
So they looked after us. And after that, we were out on the field. So it was a normal practice not to have lunch and just have dinner at night. But we were very lucky to have food. Very lucky to have food at a time when most of the people who were living there in Kyiv didn't have access to
regular meal.
hot meals.
तो खाने वाने को कुछ मिल रहा था पवन कि नहीं?
खाने को मिला, जब तक वॉर नहीं हुआ तब तक तो मिला था, लेकिन उसके बाद जब कंडीशन वॉर जैसी हो गई थी तो काफ़ी लोग वहाँ से जाने लगे, तो अब उस टाइम पे हमें प्रॉब्लम हुआ था काफ़ी. हम लोग रात को जैसे कभी चॉकलेट खा लिया हमने, कभी बिस्किट खा लिए, पानी नहीं मिल पा रहा था हमें.
नहीं, but when we were traveling, अभी refugee train, refugee bus and the flight, the train was around 12 to 14 hours. Then the bus journey was also almost that time. And I think we didn't have any food except for chocolate and a bar of chocolate amongst all of us, and a packet of chips amongst all of us for 2 days. 2 days, vrat samajh karke.
Geeta, how do you think this is likely to end in the way that this battle is progressing and from all that we know at this moment?
Well, see, the winter months were important for Putin because this is the time for him to push. Europe will not push back, and that's what happened. But now it's time for negotiations because Putin will continue pushing unless and until Ukraine agrees to a few conditions. I don't think all of the conditions will be met with, but certainly some of them. Neutrality is one of them, and it's non-negotiable. Not joining NATO is non-negotiable for Putin. And that certainly is an area that can be one of the reasons why this war can come to an end. I do not think that recognizing the republics is something that Ukraine would agree to at this point in time. Crimea, maybe they'll give way to. So yeah, it is going to be a long process of negotiation before things come to an end.
I must tell our viewers that when our crew came back from Ukraine, our chairman and editor-in-chief Arun Puri declared 1 week holiday. He doesn't want to see them in office. So I hope, Gaurav, you have no plans. I can see Aditi, she's sitting there, she's waving, saying, yeah, I'm so happy that you're back. I hope you have no plans of wanting to go back, or you won't be filling up requisitions. Please send me back.
So I take a week off, since that's an instruction. And we take this 1 week off. I'm taking Aditi and Vidushi out. The moment we come back, I'm coming to you to send me back to Ukraine.
I must tell you that Aditi is sitting there. She'll cock her Kalashnikov and aim straight at your head. And the Ukrainians, they have let you go, but Aditi will kill you. And Vidushi is sitting next to you. Are you okay with him going back again?
I think I really like Vidushi. She's a brave girl and very honest about how she feels and thinks.
Pawan, your mom was very anxious about you being away, and she must have been very relieved that you're back home safe and sound.
Yes, बिल्कुल. अभी आने के बाद उनको काफ़ी अच्छा लग रहा है. अब वो ठीक हैं. अभी एयरपोर्ट में आए थे तो काफ़ी इमोशनल हो गए थे.
एयरपोर्ट में आए थे? सब आए थे. ऐसा वेलकम मिला पवन को. और
उस टाइम एक वो इमोशनल मोमेंट था. वो रो भी गई थी कि इतने दिन तक दूर थे, इनकी थोड़ा सा
लड़ाई तो नहीं थी आपकी गौरव से वहाँ पे?
नहीं लड़ाई नहीं. वो तो
सच बता दो, अब ऐसा भी क्या छिपाना.
नहीं चलता रहता है. कहीं मैंने बोला था इनको कि यहाँ पे मत करो, लेकिन ये नहीं करना है, ये पर यहीं से करके चलेंगे. चलिए फिर फंसेंगे तो दोनों ही फंसेंगे वहाँ पे. जब लगेगी गोली तो दोनों को लगेगी. तो ये करके करते थे वहाँ पे.
आपकी लड़ाई हुई मोहसिन श्वेता से या गीता से?
मैं लड़ता ही नहीं किसी से.
अच्छा.
हम लोग तो अपनी तरफ से लड़ ही रहते. नहीं, लड़ने के लिए सिर्फ 2 सेनाएं काफ़ी थी. ये मुझे लगता है कि why we succeeded was because we were a wonderful team.
Yes.
There was no competition, we were just complementing each other.
And that's fantastic. And as I said, our eyes still very closely focused on what's happening in Ukraine, our thoughts and prayers with the people of Ukraine. And we'll keep tracking. Our crew may be back, but we've got Rajesh Pawar and so many other contributors. Plus, you've just heard Gaurav, Geeta, Shweta, everyone's still itching to get back, as is our entire bureau that's been getting their Schengen visas and attempting Ukrainian visas. And that's just one of the phenomenal things about being a reporter, that no matter how crazy it may seem from the outside, you just want to be where the action is, and that's the spirit of a true reporter, which you saw manifest itself in the fantastic coverage that Shweta, Gaurav, Geeta, Pawan and Mohsin put out. So thank you so much. And Vidushi, thank you for being such a strong member of our family, and for being supportive and saying that you're okay with your father being where he was and you're happy to send him again. That is truly incredible. So thank you. Aditi, Gaurav may have a different view on this. She's waiting for you. So all the best, and wish all of you and those who are watching at this time a very, very happy Holi. They've come in just in time for Holi, but we're also hoping the war in Ukraine ends and that peace is restored, and hopefully the negotiations that Geeta was speaking about will come to fruition. I wish you all a very, very happy Holi. You've earned your week-long break, so enjoy it. And don't be in any rush to go back. I'll have more for you on the other side. Stay with us.
As Russia declared war on Ukraine, as the world was plunged again into crisis, with the only Indian team in the real war zone.
This is Mariupol. You hear a series. Hear this sound.
I will show you a quick, so to say, bombshell room tour.
I can smell the gunpowder in the air.
And without pause, India Today totally dominates viewership and smashes the competition. When it's the world's biggest news story, there's only one gold standard of journalism.
would you share your home address if you knew your life was in danger? Well, that would be usually someone's normal response, except for Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who did quite the opposite. Have a look here as to how he's spelling out his address despite surviving 3 assassination attempts.
Залишаюсь у Києві, на Банковій, не ховаючись і нікого не боюсь.
The assassination plans were thwarted after anti-war Russians leaked intel to Ukraine. And guess what? This information came from Russia's Federal Security Service, who by the looks of it does not want blood on their hands at least. Now coming back to Zelensky, who was behind the assassination attempts? One is a Kremlin-backed Wagner group who were behind 2 of the 3 attacks, and the others are Chechen special forces. Zelensky dodged this one when an attempt was made by them on the outskirts of Kiev. And if this happens, fingers will obviously be pointed at Moscow. And if the assassination succeeds, Ukraine will be under dismay with its head of state gone. So, in case Ukraine's charismatic leader is taken out, the Ukraine government has a contingency plan in place. Although the plan was not spelt out for obvious reasons, Ukrainians will ensure that there is continuity of the government one way or the other. This news comes after United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken had said, and I quote, "The Ukrainians have plans in place that I'm not going to talk about or get into any details on to make sure that there is what we would call continuity of government one way or the other." And let me leave it at that. Zelensky has been on the front lines, never been behind any covers, but his leadership nonetheless has been instrumental in inspiring Ukrainians to fight back. Although a plan is in place, his departure would surely cause panic and demotivate Ukrainians. Moreover, there might be Russian-backed lobbying of placing a pro-Russian leader, Viktor Yanukovych, in place. Viktor Yanukovych is a controversial figure and former president of Ukraine who was ousted from Ukraine in 2014. He took refuge in Russia after he was found guilty of treason by a Ukrainian court. The possibilities are only endless, and Moscow will leave no stone unturned to get their demands met, even if it means to be manufactured through assassination.
When it's the world's biggest news story, there's only one gold standard of journalism.
You are watching India Today.
Rahul Kanwal, 23 years of experience, 5 conflicts covered, unmatched time in war zone.
The first embedded operation in the history of Indian television journalism.
Gaurav Sawant, 28 years of reporting, 8 conflicts covered, unmatched hours in conflict areas.
Actual firing is taking place, the grads are firing.
Shivarur, 19 years of reporting, 5 conflicts covered, unmatched view of international crossfires.
And the attack guns are firing away.
Geeta Mohan, 18 years of reporting, 3 conflicts covered. When the world is at war, there is no compromise on India Today.
Moscow is apparently using stealthy suicide drones to attack the Ukrainian army. Now, these unmanned drones can slip past the enemy line of fire. They are designed to stay under the radar of traditional air defense systems. Russia is not just flexing its military ego, but also throwing in these cutting-edge lethal weapons to deliver a strong message to NATO, but of course at the expense of Ukraine. Has Ukraine become Russia's playing field for their experimental weapons? This loitering devil in the sky is lethal. Let's find out what it can do. Russian drones found in the Ukrainian capital were KUB loitering munitions. Loitering munitions are a type of unmanned weapon system that waits passively in the air around the target before striking the targeted area. And Russia is using these drones to make precision attacks on military targets in Ukraine. These drones are made by a Russian defense contractor, Kalashnikov Concern, and Zala Aero Group. Each of them packs a small explosive charge. Targets are fed into the drone or through an image uploaded on its control system. The drone then seeks its target out and drops itself to blow the target into smithereens. These loitering munition drones are multi-purpose and used as part of a swarm of drones. It can fly as fast as 80 to 130 kilometers per hour with a flight duration of 30 minutes. The maximum payload it can carry is up to 3 kgs. It can be deployed discreetly as it practically makes no sound. And once deployed, it loiters in the air to seek its target and attacks it right from above. The drone falls headfirst along a vertical trajectory similar to that of kamikazes, a Japanese aircraft loaded with explosives and making a deliberate suicidal crash on an enemy target. Deployment of UAVs is not the only new ploy on the part of the amended Russian approach. Missile attacks in the western region, close to Ukraine's border with Poland, along with attempted sea blockade by Russian naval forces, are designed to cut off Ukraine's supplies from Western countries. But Kyiv, under the leadership of Vladimir Zelensky, has been able to surprise Moscow with help of consistent supplies from the West. The majority of these supplies include crucial small arms, anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons. Increased attacks on sensitive civilian facilities such as hospitals over the past few days is now seen as a deliberate pressure tactic intended to break the morale of the Ukrainian masses.
Did you ever notice the walking style of Russian President Vladimir Putin? The way he walks with his right arm held rigid while his left arm swings freely. Technically, this kind of move is called clearly reduced right-sided arm swing. The British Medical Journal had published this study in 2015. In the study, the team of neurologists had studied his walking style and said that he dons a strange gunslinger's move. So where did he learn this style from? Researchers estimate that when Putin used to spy in the KGB of the Soviet Union, it was then that he must have learned to walk like this during weapons training. According to the researchers, Putin's walking style fits as per KGB training manual. Let's also tell you that Putin rose from the rank of a spy in KGB to the rank of a lieutenant colonel. KGB operatives are told to hang the weapon in their right hand, leaning to one side, move rapidly with the opposite leg extended. This also increases the speed of walking. Researchers also said that Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, former Russian defense ministers Anatoly Serdyukov, Sergei Ivanov, and a military commander have been seen in such moves. Neurologist and movement disorder specialist Bastian Bloem had led this study. In one of his interviews, he'd said that this is an unusual study, but at the same time, it's a very serious question for neurological observation.
He reports amidst the attacks.
Very close. It was just on top of us. Everybody on the ground.
He reports amidst the shellings.
Bombing is coming closer to us. Everybody's running now. Panic everywhere.
He reports from cities under siege. A Special Forces veteran's unmatched view of the war.
They're firing. They're firing on us now. because I tried to show them on the camera.
Okay, you need
go, go. Don't stop, bro. Don't stop.
Soldier reporter Rajesh Pawar, only on India Today.
I just want to show you what happened on the battlefield on day 22 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. An effort to try and work out a rapprochement, a peace plan, still in the works. And in just a moment, we'll get our team from Ukraine to start talking about what covering the war over the past month was like for them. But here is our battlefield dispatch.
Markets on fire. Schools shelled. Back-to-back strikes. Ukraine continues to face the unsparing onslaught by Putin's army. As Russia continues its invasion, there's bloodbath on the streets of Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol, and many other cities and towns spread across Ukraine. The second biggest city of Kharkiv paints a picture of destruction. Airstrikes that rocked marketplaces left buildings on fire, smoldering and charred. The relentless attacks by Putin's forces didn't even spare schools. Plumes of smoke were seen emerging from a school that lies in ruins and totally devastated. Another badly hit city, Mariupol, has bodies lying on the streets. Target of multiple daily attacks, the city witnessed massive strike on a drama theatre where hundreds of civilians had taken shelter. The sprawling building was reduced to a pile of debris with hundreds trapped. As the Russian army advances towards the capital, attacks on Kyiv's suburbs continue. Residential buildings were seen on fire, with locals struggling to flee using destroyed bridges. Casualties continue to rise.
The Russian state has become an outspoken terrorist, and it is not ashamed. But it will be responsible for everything. The world is already beginning to understand that without the recognition of Russia as a terrorist state, it will be impossible to restore justice for Ukraine. It will be impossible to restore international order.
Today, another apartments building.
Boxing legend and Kyiv mayor Vitaly Klitschko didn't mince words, saying Russia is ruthlessly attacking civilians and not just military establishments.
Putin says he's only targeting military targets.
Bullshit. Sorry. Where is military target? This building is military target.
It's day 22 of the invasion, and Russia continues to attack cities, causing heavy damage. The city of Kharkiv continues to be worst hit. A market in Kharkiv was bombed, following which the fire raged on for hours, with smoke engulfing the nearby buildings as well.
Sviatoslav Yurash, who was earlier seen taking up a gun against Russian forces, suffered a massive personal tragedy as he lost his girlfriend Alexandra in a Russian attack.
She will remain that voice which will be speaking to the world every single day from now on.
This hospital in Mariupol is the last one standing in the ruined city, with all others bombed out. Bodies are piling up as those doctors couldn't save are lined up in the basement, since the mortuary in the city is full to the brink. The bodies include those of infants who are grievously hurt. But the Ukrainians refuse to give up, inflicting significant damage on Russian military, targeting Russian tanks firing at shelters across the city of Mariupol. Ukrainian army also shot down a Russian chopper, valiantly fighting back and against insurmountable odds. With Rajesh Pawar and Sari Mirankov in Kyiv, Bureau Report, India Today.
This is where I wrap up the news track tonight. I wish you a very, very happy, colorful, joyous Holi. I'll see you Monday evening at 8 p.m. Till then, from all of us here in the India Today newsroom, goodbye, good night.
Russia, which has launched military action against Ukraine, has father of all bombs in its weaponry. Yes, you heard that right. Father of all bombs is the world's most powerful non-nuclear bomb. Here's all that you need to know about FOAB. What is father of all bombs? The bomb that Russia has is a thermobaric bomb. It comes by many names: an arsenal bomb, a vacuum bomb, a fuel air explosive. It is a super powerful non-nuclear bomb that has a blast equivalent to more than 44 tons of TNT. Father of all bombs can cause damage in a radius of 300 meters. The destructive weapon is dropped from a jet and detonates mid-air. It pulls oxygen out of the air and produces a similar effect to a small nuclear weapon. Fuel air bombs are more complicated than they may sound. They carry a different fuel which quickly turns into an arsenal that seeps into buildings and low places such as cellars, bunkers and caves. Afterwards, a large explosive goes off shortly which carries metal grains. But it's not the weapon's most devastating effect. It's the supersonic shock wave that's the deadliest, which results in a vacuum. Simply put, the so-called vacuum bomb is capable of vaporizing human bodies, crushing internal organs, and reducing cities to rubble. Nothing can protect from it. Not a tank, not body armor. The destruction is definite. Who developed these bombs? Both the United States and the Soviet Union developed thermobaric weapons in 1960s. In September 2007, the largest thermobaric weapon ever made was detonated by Russia and created an explosion equivalent to 40 tons. Russia's father of all bombs is said to be 4 times more powerful than the United States' mother of all bombs. The US version was first tested in 2003 in Florida, and it reportedly costs over $16 million each. In 2017, the US dropped one which weighed 21,600 pounds on the Taliban in Afghanistan. It left a crater more than 300 meters wide after it exploded 6 feet above the ground. China has also developed a bomb to counter America's mother of all bombs. In 2019, China tested the Xi'an H-6K. According to Chinese government, Xi'an H-6K can destroy any building or military establishment. Use of father of all bombs on Ukraine. The FOAB is Kremlin's weapon of choice. The bomb was allegedly used in Syria in 2016, and it can now be used to demolish the Ukrainian defense establishment and, more importantly, break the morale of the country's military and its people. Reports have it that Putin has ordered its use as part of his shock and awe campaign.
The incentives help you build up, but once they are taken away, you're no longer globally competitive. Is that a fear?
Your point is absolutely right, that yes, the scheme is only there for for let's say 5 years. And I think that's the challenge in front of the industry, that we need to ensure that we are globally competitive in these 5 years and we don't depend on any of these subsidies or the schemes.
As Russia declared war on Ukraine, as the world was plunged again into crisis, with the only Indian team in the real war zone.
This is Mariupol. You hear a series. Hear this sound.
I will show you a quick, so to say, bombshell room tour.
I can smell the gunpowder in the air.
And without pause, India Today totally dominates viewership and smashes the competition. When it's the world's biggest news story, there's only one gold standard of journalism.
Anupam Kher starrer The Kashmir Files is a fictional tale that highlights atrocities against Kashmiri Pandits in the 1990s.
जितने भी कश्मीरी पंडितों से मैं मिला, उनका जो सबसे बड़ा दुख और मलाल है, मुझसे सब लोगों ने अलग अलग तरह से बोला, अगर पाकिस्तान से टेररिस्ट आके हमारे साथ ये करते, जो ऐसा नहीं है कि वो करते तो एक बार समझ भी सकते थे, पर हमारा कत्ल करने वाले हमारे पड़ोसी, हमारे स्टूडेंट्स, हमारी फिल्म देखिएगा आप, स्टूडेंट्स ने किया है, जिन टीचरों ने पढ़ा के BA MA किया है, हमारे दोस्त सहेलियां, इन लोगों ने किया है, जो हमारे घर में आके खेलते थे बच्चे, जरा से इतने से हमारे घर में जिनने घुटनों चलना सीखा, जब वो बड़े हो गए, मूछें आ गई, उन्होंने आके हमारे पति को मार दिया। ये जो गम है, अपनों ने ही हमको मारा, वो गम जो है मुझे लगता नहीं है इनके जीते जी कभी इनके दिल से निकल सकता।
वो अमानवीय लोग हैं, उनमें उनके दिल में, उनके शरीर में दिल नहीं है, राक्षस हैं। क्योंकि आप कैसे इंसान महसूस करते हैं कि आप इंसान हैं, जब आपका किसी के लिए, आपका दूसरे का दुख आपको अपना दुख लगता है, तो लगता है कि आप इंसान हैं, ह्यूमैनिटी में बिलीव करते हैं, आप लोगों की तकलीफ में बिलीव करते हैं। तो जिन लोगों में दूसरे के दुख के प्रति कोई दुख व्यक्त नहीं होता है, उनके बारे में हम क्या बात करें?
The film on the exodus of Hindus from Kashmir in the 1990s has kicked up a storm in India.
जब मैं स्क्रिप्ट पढ़ा तो मैं न्यूयॉर्क में रह रहा था उस समय, और मैं अकेला 36th फ्लोर पे था, तो मैं बहुत रोया था, क्योंकि बहुत दिनों बाद उस सपने को पूरा होता देख रहा था कि जो 32 साल से नहीं हुआ था, कि किसी ने हमारी आवाज़ सुनी ही नहीं थी। उसमें मैंने अपने दादाजी को देखा था, मैंने अपने पिताजी को देखा था, जो मेरा नाम है इस फिल्म में पुष्कर नाथ, वो मेरे पिताजी का नाम था। और आई थॉट दैट दिस इज़ द बेस्ट वे टू गिव अ ट्रिब्यूट to not only my parents, my father and my grandfather and my other uncles, but ये बेस्ट तरीका है कि मैं उन 5 लाख लोगों को, उनके दर्द को दुनिया तक पहुंचा सकूं through the character of पुष्कर नाथ पंडित।
It even made it to the parliament.
जो लोग हमेशा फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन के झंडे लेकर के घूमते हैं, वो पूरी जमात बौखला गई है पिछले 5-6 दिन से। और ये फिल्म का तथ्यों के आधार पर, आर्ट के आधार पर उसकी विवेचना करने के बजाय उसको डिस्क्रेडिट करने के लिए बड़ा मुहिम चला है, आपने देखा होगा।
प्रधानमंत्री का ऐसे बड़े मंच से बोलना, ये बहुत बड़ी बात है, और मैं बहुत आशावादी आदमी हूँ। मुझे लगता है कि चीज़ें होती हैं, देर ज़रूर होती है लेकिन होती हैं। तो आज जब हम यहाँ आंसू बहा रहे हैं, ये दुख के तो है ही, मगर उससे ज़्यादा इस बात की हैं कि हमारे दुख को किसी ने पहचाना।